There is an old world beneath our world. It has no morning, no familiar sunrise spilling across the horizon, no seasons passing through orchards and fields. It is a quieter place, hidden from the eyes of the living, where rivers move through darkness and pale flowers grow in meadows that never see the sun. The ancient Greeks called this realm Hades. The name belonged both to the god who ruled it and, eventually, to the kingdom itself. To imagine Hades was to imagine everything that waited beyond the final boundary of mortal life. It was a place of shadows, but it was not simply a place of suffering. Most of the dead did not spend eternity being punished. They wandered through quiet fields. They rested beside strange rivers. They existed as faint reflections of the people they had once been. And somewhere within this immense kingdom stood the palace of its ruler. Hades was one of the three great brothers who divided the universe after the overthrow of the Titans. Zeus took the heavens, Poseidon claimed the sea, and Hades received the world beneath the earth. His kingdom was not a lesser portion. It was simply a different one. The gods of Olympus belonged to the bright world of mountains, storms, sunlight, and celebration. Hades belonged to the hidden places. He ruled over what could not be seen: buried treasure, sleeping seeds, forgotten bones, and the countless souls who had crossed beyond the reach of the living. His was a kingdom without ordinary travelers. No mortal could simply open a door and walk inside. There were boundaries between the two worlds, and those boundaries were guarded carefully. A soul leaving life might be guided by Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods, toward the distant entrance of the underworld. There, the living world would gradually fall away. Behind the traveler would remain the sound of wind through trees, the warmth of sunlight, the voices of family and friends. Ahead would be the darkness. Somewhere in that darkness flowed the rivers of the dead. The Styx wound through the underworld, its name forever connected with the solemn oaths of the gods. The Acheron carried its waters through the realm of sorrow. Cocytus was associated with lamentation, while the mysterious Phlegethon flowed with fire. And somewhere beyond them was Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, whose waters could erase the memories of what had come before. At the edge of one of these rivers waited a ferryman. His name was Charon. He was old, stern, and patient. His work was simple. He carried the dead across the dark water toward the kingdom beyond. The Greeks imagined a small coin being placed with the body of the deceased, a payment for the journey. On the opposite shore waited another guardian, Cerberus, the great hound of Hades. 3 heads watched the gates. Serpents curled around his body, and his monstrous presence marked the boundary between those who had entered and the world they had left behind. Cerberus did not exist merely to frighten the dead. His purpose was to make certain that the boundaries of Hades remained intact. Once the gates closed behind a soul, there was rarely a path back. Yet mythology tells us that a few living people managed to cross those boundaries. Orpheus descended in search of the woman he loved. Heracles entered the kingdom as part of his final labors. Odysseus traveled to the land of the dead seeking knowledge from the departed. And Theseus, together with his companion Pirithous, descended for reasons far less noble. Each returned with a different understanding of what lay below. Some found sorrow, some found wisdom, some encountered punishment, and some discovered that the underworld was not quite what they had imagined, because beyond the rivers and the gates was not a single place. The Greek underworld contained many landscapes. There were vast meadows where ordinary souls wandered among pale flowers. There were regions reserved for those who had earned extraordinary blessings. There were places of punishment where certain legendary figures were condemned to endless tasks. And deeper still was Tartarus, an ancient region of darkness where the defeated titans were imprisoned. The underworld was therefore not merely a destination. It was a reflection of the Greek imagination itself. Here, the Greeks placed their questions about justice and memory. And beside Hades stood another remarkable figure, Persephone. She had once belonged entirely to the world above, where flowers opened beneath the spring sun. But after being taken into the kingdom below, she became its queen, dividing her existence between two worlds. Her story would explain the changing seasons. Her presence would connect the darkness beneath the earth with the renewal of life above it. And in the quiet mythology of the Greeks, she would become one of the most beautiful symbols of the strange relationship between death and return. So tonight, there is nowhere we need to hurry. Let the world above grow quiet. Imagine the last sounds of the evening fading behind you. Imagine a path descending slowly beneath the earth, beyond the familiar roads and fields, toward a place that the ancient Greeks believed existed just beyond the reach of ordinary sight. There is no need to be afraid. Somewhere in the darkness, beneath the world of the living, Hades and Persephone continue their eternal reign. Our journey begins at the beginning, with three brothers standing before a newly divided cosmos, waiting to discover which portion of creation would become their own. Long before the rivers of the underworld had names, before Charon waited beside his boat, and before the pale souls of the dead wandered through the meadows, the universe belonged to an older generation of gods. They were the Titans. Their ruler was Cronus, a powerful figure who had risen against his own father, Uranus, and taken control of the cosmos. For a time, the Titans ruled from their ancient seat of power, and the world belonged to them. But Cronus had been warned that one day his own children would overthrow him. It was a prophecy he could not forget. So whenever his wife, Rhea, gave birth to one of their children, Cronus swallowed the infant whole. Hestia disappeared first, then Demeter, then Hera. Poseidon followed, and finally another son was born. His name was Zeus. Rhea could not bear to surrender him. She carried the newborn away in secret and hid him on the island of Crete. There, far from his father's sight, Zeus grew beneath the protection of those who had helped conceal him. A stone wrapped in cloth was given to Cronus instead. He swallowed it without knowing that the child he feared was already growing beyond his reach. Years passed. Zeus eventually returned. He forced Cronus to release the children he had swallowed, and the gods who had been hidden within their father's body emerged into the world once again. They were grown now. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Poseidon, and Zeus stood together, and together they would challenge the Titans. The struggle that followed was immense. For 10 years, the older gods and the younger gods fought for control of the cosmos. But Zeus and his brothers and sisters did not fight alone. From their imprisonment beneath the earth, the Cyclopes were released. They forged weapons for the younger gods. For Zeus, they created the thunderbolt. For Poseidon, the trident. And for Hades, something quieter, a helmet that could make its wearer invisible. The three brothers now possessed powers suited to the domains they would one day rule. Thunder belonged to the sky. The trident commanded the sea. And invisibility belonged naturally to the god whose kingdom would remain hidden from the living. Eventually, the Titans were defeated. The younger gods had won. But victory created a new question. Who would rule what? Zeus had become the strongest among them, but the universe was vast, and the three brothers would each need a realm of their own. According to the ancient stories, they drew lots. There was no grand battle between the brothers. No throne was seized. No kingdom was stolen. Instead, chance itself decided their portions of the cosmos. Zeus received the sky, Poseidon received the sea, and Hades received the underworld. The earth, however, was shared among them. This was important. Hades had not been banished beneath the earth as a punishment. He had not been sent away because his brothers disliked him. He had received a kingdom just as vast and significant as theirs. The difference was that his kingdom was hidden. Zeus could look across the heavens and see the clouds gathering around Mount Olympus. Poseidon could look across the horizon and see the endless surface of the sea. Hades ruled a place that could not be seen at all. His realm existed beneath their feet. It was the destination toward which every mortal eventually traveled. And so the three brothers went their separate ways. Zeus rose into the heavens and became the ruler of the gods. Poseidon took his place among the waves, where storms could rise and disappear upon the open sea. Hades descended into his dark kingdom. There he established his palace. There, the boundaries between life and death would be maintained, and there he would remain for much of eternity. The Greeks did not imagine Hades as a god who spent his days wandering among the other Olympians. His kingdom was his responsibility. Everything that entered it became part of his realm, and the invisible god watched over it all. There was also something else beneath the earth that belonged to Hades. Well, to the Greeks, the earth was not merely soil and stone. Beneath it were metals, precious ores, crystals, and hidden treasures. Seeds disappeared into the ground before returning as crops. The earth concealed both the remains of the dead and the materials from which wealth could be drawn. For this reason, Hades could also be associated with riches. The god of the dead was also connected with the things hidden beneath the ground that allowed the living world to prosper. Death and fertility were not always opposites in ancient Greek thought. A seed disappeared into darkness before becoming a plant. A body returned to the earth. What was hidden below could eventually emerge above. Hades belonged to that hidden world. And so, as the other gods became associated with sunlight, storms, harvests, music, love, wisdom, and war, Hades remained apart. He was the keeper of what could not be reclaimed, the god who ruled the final destination of mortals. His power was quiet because it did not need to announce itself. Every king would eventually meet his kingdom. Every hero, every sailor, every farmer, every child. No army could defeat him. And perhaps this was why the Greeks spoke of him carefully. They understood that death was not something even the greatest gods could simply erase. The underworld had its own laws, its own rivers, its own guardians, its own ruler, and now that ruler had taken his place below the earth. The ancient Greeks did not always imagine Hades as a cruel or malicious god. This distinction is important. Hades was frightening because death itself was frightening, but he was not usually portrayed as a figure who delighted in causing suffering. He did not spend his days searching the earth for people to torment. His role was more solemn than that. He maintained the order of the world below. Once a soul had crossed into his kingdom, it belonged there. The boundary between the living and the dead was sacred, and Hades was the god responsible for preserving it. In this way, he was less like an executioner and more like a king whose kingdom happened to be the final destination of every mortal. There was a certain inevitability to his authority. The gods of Olympus could grant blessings or send storms. They could become angry, disguise themselves, fall in love, or interfere in the affairs of mortals. Hades was different. He represented something that could not be persuaded forever. Eventually, everyone came to him. Because of this, the Greeks sometimes avoided speaking his name directly. Names had power, and death was a subject that invited caution. Instead, they might call him Pluton or Pluto, a name associated with wealth. It might seem strange that the god of the dead would be called the wealthy one, but the connection became clearer when the Greeks considered what lay beneath the surface of the earth. The ground beneath their feet concealed nearly everything. Gold and silver were buried in stone. Precious minerals waited underground. Roots reached downward before plants emerged into the sunlight. Seeds disappeared beneath the soil during winter, only to return months later as green shoots. Even the bodies of the dead were eventually returned to the earth. The underworld was therefore a place of hidden things. And hidden things could be valuable. Hades became associated with this unseen abundance. His wealth was not the wealth of merchants counting coins in a marketplace. It was the wealth of the earth itself. For this reason, he could be imagined holding a cornucopia, the overflowing horn of abundance, in traditions that connected him with fertility and prosperity. The same god who ruled over the dead could also represent the riches that came from beneath the ground. This was one of the quieter paradoxes of Greek mythology. The earth gave life. The earth received the dead. And the earth concealed treasures. All of these things belonged to the same hidden realm. Hades himself was often imagined as solemn and imposing. Unlike many Olympians, he did not have a large collection of dramatic adventures. He did not appear constantly in stories of divine romances or rivalries. He remained distant. Perhaps this made him feel even more powerful. A god who rarely needed to leave his palace did not need to prove his authority. His kingdom already belonged to him, and he possessed one remarkable object that made him even more mysterious: the helmet of invisibility. The Cyclopes had created it during the war against the Titans, and when Hades wore it, he could disappear from sight. The Greeks understood invisibility as more than a magical trick. It suited Hades perfectly. He was the god of things unseen. His kingdom could not be visited by ordinary living people. His subjects were shadows. His riches were buried. His palace existed beyond the reach of sunlight. Even his name could be spoken indirectly. Everything about him seemed connected to concealment. There was also a curious relationship between Hades and the living world. Although his kingdom was separate from the earth above, the two realms were never completely disconnected. Every burial created a small connection between them. Every grave marked a place where someone who had belonged to the living world had entered the realm below. The ancient Greeks understood that honoring the dead mattered. A body needed proper burial. The dead needed to be remembered, and the living had responsibilities toward those who had crossed the boundary. This helps explain why stories of the underworld often begin not with terror, but with a journey. A soul did not simply vanish. It traveled. It was guided. It crossed rivers. It passed through gates. And eventually, it entered the kingdom ruled by Hades. The journey gave structure to something otherwise impossible to understand. Death was mysterious, but mythology could give it roads and landmarks. It could give the darkness rivers. It could give the gates a guardian. It could give the dead a ferryman. And it could give the entire realm a king. Still, Hades was not entirely alone in his palace. For there was one figure whose presence would transform the character of his kingdom: Persephone. She belonged to the world of sunlight, flowers, and growing things. Her mother was Demeter, goddess of the harvest, and through her, Persephone was connected with the changing earth. Yet one day, while gathering flowers in a meadow, Persephone would disappear from the world above. Her disappearance would bring grief to her mother. It would change the seasons, and it would eventually bring a queen into the kingdom of the dead. But before Persephone arrived, Hades' realm was already waiting. The roads had been laid out. The rivers were flowing. The gates stood in darkness. And somewhere at the edge of the kingdom, a path was beginning to form between the world of the living and the world below. For sooner or later, another soul would make that journey. And this time we will follow it. We will leave behind the world of the gods and begin the long road taken by the dead. The world above rarely noticed when someone began the journey below. A room might grow quiet. A candle might burn beside a resting body. Outside, the ordinary world could continue almost unchanged. The wind would move through the trees. Water would run through a stream. Somewhere, another family might be preparing a meal, unaware that a life had just reached its final moment. But in the imagination of the ancient Greeks, death was not simply an instant of disappearance. It was a departure. The person who had lived in the world above was now beginning a journey into another realm. The Greeks had many different ideas about what happened to a person after death, and those ideas changed across centuries and regions. But one image appeared again and again, the soul leaving the body and traveling toward the kingdom beneath the earth. The body remained behind. The soul continued. Some traditions imagine the soul as a shadowy image of the person it had once belonged to. It might retain its memories, its appearance, and something of its former personality, but it was no longer truly alive. It was a shade. In Homeric poetry, the dead are often described as insubstantial and diminished, lacking the strength they possessed in life. This was one of the unsettling ideas surrounding Hades. The dead were recognizable, but they were not the same. A great warrior might still resemble the warrior he had once been. A beloved mother might still appear as the mother her family remembered. But something essential had changed. The warmth of life was gone. The strength of the body was gone. What remained was a quiet reflection. And yet the journey itself required guidance. The Greeks knew that roads could be confusing even in the world of the living. Mountains, forests, rivers, and unfamiliar paths could separate one place from another. The road to the underworld was stranger still. No living map could show it. No traveler could ask for directions. For this reason, one of the gods was sometimes given the task of guiding souls. His name was Hermes. Most people knew Hermes as the messenger of the gods, the swift god with winged sandals who carried messages between Olympus and the mortal world. But Hermes had another role. He was Psychopompus, the guide of souls. This was a fitting responsibility for a god who moved easily between different worlds. Hermes could travel from Olympus to Earth. He could cross boundaries that other beings could not. And when a mortal's life ended, he could accompany the departing soul toward the realm of Hades. Imagine that journey beginning quietly, the familiar sounds of the living world gradually becoming distant. The soul moves away from the place where its body remains. Hermes walks ahead. There is no need for haste. The road is old. It has been traveled countless times before. Kings have walked it. Farmers have walked it. Children have walked it. Sailors lost at sea have found their way there. Heroes have eventually arrived. So have those whose names were never recorded. The road does not care about fame. It does not distinguish between wealth and poverty. The same kingdom waits for everyone. For the ancient Greeks, this universality was one of the most powerful aspects of death. A person might spend an entire lifetime building a reputation, gathering possessions, winning battles, raising a family, or becoming famous. But none of those things could prevent the final journey. The underworld received everyone, and this is why burial was so important. The living had responsibilities toward the dead. A body needed to be cared for. The deceased needed to be mourned. Funeral rites helped mark the transition between one state of existence and another. A proper burial could also provide the dead with what they needed for their journey. Among the most familiar customs was the placing of a small coin with the deceased. This coin was associated with Charon, the ferryman who would eventually carry the soul across one of the rivers of the underworld. The practice was not universal, and ancient burial customs varied greatly. But the image became enduring. A single coin, a final possession, not wealth enough to buy anything in the world above, just enough to cross the water below. There is something strangely peaceful about that image. After an entire lifetime of gathering possessions, the traveler needed almost nothing. A small offering, a final farewell, and then the road. As the soul continued onward, the landscape of the living world would disappear. The mountains and villages would be left behind. The sounds of birds and animals would fade. Eventually, the road would lead toward places that no living person could see clearly. Some ancient traditions placed the entrance to the underworld in distant or mysterious locations: caves, deep springs, sacred groves, or places where the earth seemed to open naturally into darkness. The exact entrance was never fixed. It could be near the edge of the known world. It could be beneath the ground. It could be imagined wherever the boundary between life and death felt especially thin. But wherever the entrance stood, the meaning remained the same. There was a threshold. One side belonged to the living, the other belonged to the dead. And beyond that threshold waited the first great guardian of the kingdom. Not a god, not a ferryman, but a creature whose name would become famous throughout Greek mythology: Cerberus, the hound of Hades. 3 heads watched the road ahead, and beyond him stood the gates of the underworld. The road had grown quieter with every step. Behind the traveler lay the world of mountains, villages, and open sky. Ahead, the path narrowed toward a place where the ordinary landscape seemed to disappear altogether. There, according to the ancient imagination, stood the entrance to the kingdom of Hades. The Greeks never agreed upon a single physical location for this entrance. Different poets and traditions placed the underworld in different places. Some imagined entrances in distant lands, others in caves or beneath the earth, and still others described a realm existing somewhere beyond the western edge of the known world. What mattered was not the geography. What mattered was the boundary. The underworld was separated from the world of the living by a threshold that could not casually be crossed. As the traveler approached, the surroundings became unfamiliar. The light seemed weaker. The air felt still. There were no busy roads here, no voices calling from houses, no fields being worked beneath the sun. The silence was not necessarily frightening. It was simply complete. This was a place where ordinary life had ended, and standing before the entrance was Cerberus. The ancient stories gave the hound many strange features. He was usually described as having 3 heads, though some traditions imagined even more. Serpents were associated with his body, and a serpent's tail sometimes completed his monstrous appearance. He was the offspring of 2 ancient creatures: Typhon, one of the most terrifying beings in Greek mythology, and Echidna, a half-woman, half-serpent creature who gave birth to several famous monsters. Cerberus therefore belonged to an old and powerful family of creatures. But despite his frightening appearance, his purpose was remarkably simple. He guarded the boundary. The dead could enter. The living were not supposed to leave. This distinction was important. Cerberus was not merely a monster placed at the entrance to frighten travelers. He was part of the structure of the underworld itself. The kingdom needed a guardian. Without one, the boundary between life and death could easily be crossed. The stories of Greek mythology repeatedly remind us that this boundary mattered. Living people who entered the underworld were unusual. Those who returned were rarer still. Heracles would eventually enter and emerge again. Orpheus would descend for Eurydice. Odysseus would visit the realm of the dead seeking knowledge. But these were extraordinary journeys. For everyone else, the gates were one way. The dead entered, the living remained above. And so Cerberus waited. His many heads allowed him to watch the entrance from every direction. His serpents added to the strange impression that nothing about this creature belonged to the ordinary world. Yet there is another side to the story. Cerberus was not always portrayed as an endlessly snarling beast. In some traditions, the guardian could be calmed. The Greek imagination knew that even monsters could be approached through cleverness, music, or divine authority. Orpheus would eventually discover this. His music could quiet even the creatures of the underworld. Heracles would discover something else. Strength and courage could accomplish what seemed impossible. But for most souls, there was no need to challenge the hound. They simply passed through. Beyond Cerberus waited the kingdom itself. The gates closed behind them. The path continued downward, and the deeper the traveler went, the more the familiar world disappeared. The underworld was not imagined as a single enormous cavern. It was a realm with landscapes of its own. There were fields, rivers, palaces, dark forests, places of punishment, places of peace. The dead would not all experience the same destination. Their paths would eventually diverge. But before that could happen, every traveler had to encounter the rivers. Water was everywhere in the mythology of the underworld. The rivers marked its boundaries and divided its regions. They were not ordinary streams. Each carried its own meaning. The Styx was perhaps the most famous. Its name was associated with hatred, and the gods themselves swore their most serious oaths upon its waters. To break an oath sworn by the Styx was to risk terrible consequences, even for an immortal. Then there was Acheron, the river of sorrow. Cocytus was associated with lamentation. Phlegethon flowed with fire, and Lethe carried the waters of forgetfulness. The exact number and nature of these rivers differed between ancient sources, but together they created a landscape that felt both familiar and impossible. Water usually gives life. In the underworld, water could instead separate life from death. A river could become a boundary that no traveler could simply swim across. The soul therefore needed assistance. And somewhere along the dark shore waited a figure who had been making this crossing for longer than any mortal could remember. His name was Charon. His boat was waiting. His oar rested quietly in the water. And on the shore stood the newly arrived dead, gathered before the river that would carry them farther into Hades' kingdom. Soon, they would leave the final traces of the world above behind. The crossing was about to begin. Before the dead could continue into the deeper regions of Hades, they had to pass the creature who watched over the threshold. Cerberus was already waiting. He was unlike any animal that could be found beneath the sunlight of the living world. His 3 heads turned in different directions, each watching the approach of another soul. His body was enormous. His tail was associated with a serpent, and other serpents were said to rise from his back and neck. He was a creature made from the imagination of a world that understood monsters as symbols as much as living beings. Cerberus represented a simple truth. The dead belonged below, and the living belonged above. The boundary had to be guarded. The ancient Greeks did not always describe Cerberus in exactly the same way. His number of heads could vary, and different poets added different details to his appearance. But the essential image remained remarkably consistent: a monstrous hound stationed at the entrance to the kingdom of the dead. His name itself became inseparable from Hades. He was the Hound of the Underworld, and although later stories would often portray him as a vicious beast, there was something almost practical about his purpose. He was a watchdog. Just as a guard dog might remain at the entrance to a home, Cerberus remained at the entrance to the realm of Hades. Only his home happened to contain the dead. The Greeks understood dogs as animals capable of guarding boundaries. They protected homes, watched over flocks, and accompanied travelers. Cerberus took this familiar role and carried it into the supernatural world. He guarded a door that no ordinary door could resemble. Beyond it waited an entire kingdom. Cerberus made certain that those who entered could not simply turn around and walk back. This rule explains why the creature appears in so many stories involving living heroes. To cross into Hades while still alive was extraordinary. To return was even more remarkable. And one of the most famous people to accomplish both was Heracles. His final labor would require him to enter the underworld itself and bring Cerberus back to the world above. It was an almost impossible task. Unlike ordinary monsters, Cerberus could not simply be hunted across a mountain or trapped in a forest. He belonged to another world. To reach him, Heracles had to cross the boundary between life and death. The journey required more than strength. In some traditions, Heracles was initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries before descending, allowing him to understand the sacred customs associated with the dead. He entered the underworld and encountered many of the figures who belonged there. But eventually, he reached the Guardian. Heracles did not defeat Cerberus with a weapon. Instead, the hero relied on his extraordinary physical strength. He seized the great hound and subdued him. The task was not to destroy Cerberus. Heracles needed him alive. And so the creature who had spent his existence guarding the gates of Hades was brought upward into the world of sunlight. For Cerberus, it was a temporary departure. For Heracles, it was another demonstration that the boundaries separating mortals from the supernatural could sometimes be crossed. Eventually, the hound was returned to the underworld. The gates closed once again. Cerberus resumed his place, and the kingdom below returned to its ancient quiet. There was another famous visitor who approached the Guardian in a very different way: Orpheus. He did not arrive carrying a sword or wearing the armor of a warrior. He carried a musical instrument. Orpheus was said to possess a gift unlike that of any other mortal. His music could move people, animals, trees, and even stones. When he descended into Hades in search of Eurydice, he played. The sound traveled through the darkness. The dead stopped to listen. Even the creatures of the underworld were affected by the music. Cerberus, too, could be soothed. The three-headed hound that guarded the boundary could be quieted by a song. It was a beautiful contrast. Strength could overcome the guardian. Music could calm him. Two very different powers could cross the same threshold. But most souls needed neither. They did not challenge Cerberus. They simply continued onward. For them, the Guardian was not an obstacle to be conquered, but another part of the journey. Once past the gates, the dead entered the wider kingdom. The sounds of the living world were now completely gone. No sunlight reached this place. No ordinary road led back. Only the distant movement of underground rivers could be heard. And among those rivers was the Styx. Its waters were unlike any river on earth. The gods themselves feared its name. They swore their most binding promises upon it. Even immortals were expected to honor an oath made by the Styx. The river therefore carried a strange authority. It was not merely water. It was a boundary, a witness, and a symbol of the seriousness of divine promises. But for the souls arriving at the edge of the underworld, another river mattered more immediately. They had to cross. A boat waited in the darkness. An old ferryman stood beside it. His name was Charon, and as the dead gathered along the shore, Charon prepared to push his boat into the black water. One by one, the souls would climb aboard. The oar would enter the river. The shore would begin to disappear. And beyond the water waited the deeper kingdom of Hades. The boat moved slowly away from the shore. Behind it stood the gates of Hades, guarded by the great hound Cerberus. Ahead stretched a darkness that seemed to have no end. But the underworld was not silent. Beneath the stillness came the quiet sound of moving water. The Greeks imagined several rivers flowing through the kingdom of the dead. Together, these rivers formed a kind of map. They marked boundaries. They separated regions. They carried the dead deeper into the realm ruled by Hades. The most famous was the Styx. The name of the Styx was spoken with unusual seriousness because even the gods were bound by its waters. When an immortal swore an oath upon the Styx, that oath became sacred. The story of the Styx began with the goddess who bore the same name. Styx was described as one of the ancient water deities, associated with a river that flowed through the underworld. During the Great War between Zeus and the Titans, she and her children sided with Zeus. For this loyalty, she received an honored place among the divine powers. Her river became the witness to the most binding promises. The gods could deceive one another. They could argue, scheme, disguise themselves, and interfere in the lives of mortals. But an oath sworn upon the Styx was different. To break it was to suffer a terrible divine punishment. The Styx therefore represented something greater than death. It represented the seriousness of a promise. The waters could not be treated casually, and so the river became one of the most powerful symbols of the underworld. But it was not the only river. There was also Charon. Charon was associated with sorrow and suffering, and in some ancient traditions it was the river that Charon ferried the dead across. Unlike the fiery or mysterious rivers deeper within the realm, Charon could be imagined as a broad, dark waterway separating the newly arrived souls from the rest of Hades. Its name itself suggested grief. A soul standing beside Charon had just left the world of the living. Everything familiar was now behind it. The sunlight was above. Ahead lay a kingdom from which it would not ordinarily return. The river became a physical representation of that separation. Then there was Cocytus. Its name was associated with lamentation. The Greeks imagined the river as a place connected with the mourning of the dead. If Charon represented sorrow, Cocytus gave sorrow a voice. One could almost imagine the sound of distant grieving carried across the water. But the underworld also contained a river of a very different nature. Phlegethon. Its name was connected with fire. Rather than cool water moving quietly through the shadows, Phlegethon was imagined as a stream of flame, particularly in traditions that placed it near Tartarus. Its presence reminded the Greeks that the underworld contained places of punishment as well as quiet resting grounds. Yet perhaps the strangest river of all was Lethe. Lethe was the river of forgetfulness. Its waters could cause the dead to lose their memories. This idea became particularly important in later Greek traditions concerning the soul. Forgetfulness could be a release. The memories of a previous life could become burdensome, and drinking from Lethe could allow the soul to move forward without carrying everything it had once known. Memory gave a person continuity. To forget was, in some sense, to become someone else. And so the underworld contained both the memory of the dead and the possibility of forgetting them. The rivers therefore represented more than obstacles. They reflected different aspects of the experience of death. The Styx represented sacred boundaries and unbreakable promises. Acheron represented sorrow. Cocytus represented mourning. Phlegethon represented fire and punishment. Lethe represented forgetfulness. Not every ancient Greek source described these rivers in precisely the same way. Greek mythology was never a single fixed story. Poets, philosophers, mystery traditions, and local communities imagined the afterlife differently. Over time, the rivers became woven together into a more elaborate picture of the underworld. And perhaps that is part of what makes them so memorable. They transformed an invisible idea into a landscape. Instead of simply saying that the dead passed from life into death, mythology gave them a river to cross. Instead of describing memory as something abstract, the Greeks imagined a stream whose waters could erase it. Instead of thinking of the underworld as a single dark place, they filled it with currents and shores, passages and boundaries. The realm beneath the earth became a world of its own. And now the souls had reached the water. Along the shore, the dead waited quietly. Some had arrived recently. Others had been there for what seemed like an eternity. The boat rocked gently against the bank. Charon stood beside it, holding his oar. He had no reason to hurry. The river had existed long before any of the souls gathered there. It would continue flowing long after they had crossed. One by one, they approached. A small coin might rest with the belongings of a newly buried person. The ferryman accepted his payment. The soul stepped aboard. The boat pushed away from the shore. The sound of the oar entering the dark water was slow and steady. And as the opposite bank drew nearer, the final traces of the world above began to disappear. Beyond the river waited the first great resting place of ordinary souls. A wide, quiet landscape covered in pale flowers. The asphodel meadows. The boat drifted through the darkness. There was no wind upon the river. No sunlight touched the water. Only the slow movement of the oar disturbed the surface as Charon guided his passengers toward the farther shore. He was the ferryman of the dead. In the imagination of the ancient Greeks, Charon had performed this task for countless generations. He was not a hero, and he was not a god who appeared in grand stories of Olympus. His importance came from something quieter. He was the one who carried the dead across. Ancient poets described him as an old and stern figure, often imagined with a rough beard and an imposing appearance. Later artistic traditions would give him a more familiar form, a dark, weathered ferryman standing beside his narrow boat. He did not need to speak much. There was little to discuss with the passengers. They knew where they were going, and Charon knew his destination. The river stretched ahead. On one side was the world that had been left behind. On the other was Hades. The crossing itself became one of the most enduring images associated with Greek death. A person could spend an entire lifetime traveling across countless roads, climbing mountains, crossing valleys, and sailing seas. But this was the final crossing. There would be no journey after it. No new village waiting beyond the next hill. No familiar house. No road leading home. The river marked the point where the journey became irreversible. And yet Charon was not imagined as cruel. He was simply doing his work. He ferried kings and beggars alike, heroes and farmers. the famous and the forgotten. The river did not care who had been powerful in life, and neither did the ferryman. Every passenger eventually became the same: a shade, a traveler, a soul waiting for passage. This equality was one of the quiet ideas hidden inside the myth. In life, people could be separated by wealth, family, rank, or reputation. In death, those distinctions became much less important. A king could not command the river to move faster. A wealthy merchant could not purchase a better destination. A warrior could not frighten the ferryman. The journey belonged to everyone. There was, however, one small detail that could make the crossing possible: the coin. Greek burial customs varied from place to place and across different periods, and not every deceased person received a coin. But the image became deeply associated with Charon. A small denomination was placed with the dead as payment for passage. Later writers imagined it as an obol, a modest coin that represented the fare for the journey. It was a remarkably humble price for such an important voyage. The living world was filled with possessions. Homes contained furniture. Workshops contained tools. People carried jewelry, clothing, weapons, and objects they had collected over many years. But none of those things mattered here. The traveler needed only enough to cross the river: a single coin, a final offering, and then nothing more. The tradition also reveals something about the importance of burial. The Greeks understood funeral rites as more than ceremonies for the living. They were part of the relationship between the living and the dead. To bury someone properly was an act of respect. To leave a body without burial could be viewed as deeply troubling because it suggested that the deceased had not been properly released from the world above. This concern appears repeatedly in Greek mythology. Characters go to extraordinary lengths to recover the bodies of loved ones. Kings argue over funeral rites. Heroes mourn their companions. Even enemies sometimes recognize the importance of allowing the dead to receive their final ceremonies. Death had its customs, and crossing had its requirements. Charon waited for those who were ready. As the boat continued, the passengers might look back. There was little to see. The shore had already disappeared into the darkness. Perhaps some souls imagined the places they had known: a childhood home, a familiar road, a mountain they had climbed, a harbor, a field, a face. Memory was still close. The river had not yet carried them far enough for the past to feel distant. But gradually, even those memories would become harder to hold. The boat moved steadily onward. There was no need for conversation, no need for explanation, only the quiet sound of water. Eventually, a faint outline began to appear ahead: the opposite shore. It was not bright. Nothing in Hades was bright in the way the living world was bright. But there was land again. The boat approached. Charon guided it toward the bank and allowed it to come gently to rest. One by one, the souls stepped out. The river was behind them now. Ahead lay a path leading deeper into the underworld. The dead had crossed the first great boundary. They were no longer travelers standing between two worlds. They had entered Hades itself. Beyond the shore stretched an open landscape. There were no cities like those above, no busy marketplaces, no temples filled with music. Instead, there were fields extending into the distance. Pale flowers grew beneath the strange darkness. The souls began to wander among them. This was the Asphodel Meadows. And here, at last, most of the ordinary dead would find their place. Beyond the river, the landscape opened. There were no steep cliffs to climb, no narrow passageways, and no great gates standing in the distance. Instead, the path widened into a vast meadow. Pale flowers covered the ground. They seemed to stretch farther than the eye could follow, growing in soft clusters beneath a sky that never quite became day. This was the Asphodel Meadows. For many modern people, the word underworld immediately suggests a place of flames and punishment. But the ancient Greek imagination was more complicated. Most of the dead were not criminals. Most had not challenged the gods. Most had not committed legendary crimes or performed extraordinary heroic deeds. They had simply lived. And after their lives ended, they came here. The Asphodel Meadows were therefore, in many traditions, the great resting place of ordinary souls. It was not paradise, but it was not necessarily a place of torment either. It was somewhere in between. The dead wandered through the fields as shades, no longer possessing the full strength or vitality they had known while alive. Their existence was quieter, dimmer, almost dreamlike. The meadow itself carried an interesting association. Asphodel was a real flowering plant found throughout the Mediterranean world. Its pale blossoms could grow in dry, rocky landscapes, and the plant became closely associated with cemeteries and the world of the dead. To the Greeks, flowers already carried an association with the cycles of life. They appeared, they bloomed, they faded, and then, in the proper season, they returned. Asphodel was particularly suited to the mythology of the underworld. It could grow where the landscape seemed harsh. It could survive where other plants might struggle. And its pale appearance fit the quiet imagery of the realm below. Imagine walking through such a field. There is no need to hurry. The souls have nowhere else to go. The landscape continues in every direction, covered with pale stems and flowers. Occasionally, one shade may recognize another. A former friend, a relative, a companion from long ago. Perhaps they remember one another. Perhaps they do not. The mythology of the dead often leaves this uncertain. In Homeric poetry, the shades can recognize people and remember elements of their former lives, but they are also diminished by death. They no longer possess the same vitality. The great warrior is no longer truly a warrior. The king is no longer truly a king. The craftsman no longer works at his bench. The sailor no longer waits beside the harbor. Those identities belonged to the world above. Here, everyone has become a shade. This idea creates a strange equality among the dead. The distinctions that seemed so important during life begin to dissolve. A person who once commanded an army might wander beside someone who had spent an entire life tending a small field. The underworld does not need their titles. It does not need their possessions. It simply receives them. The meadows, therefore, became a landscape of stillness. Nothing demanded achievement. There were no contests to win, no harvests to gather, no ships to repair, no battles to fight. The endless work of ordinary life had stopped. For some souls, this might have seemed peaceful. For others, it might have seemed empty. Greek mythology did not always promise that the afterlife would be exciting. Sometimes it imagined something much quieter, a continuation without the urgency of life, a place where the dead could simply remain. This is one reason the Asphodel Meadows are so different from Elysium. Elysium was associated with extraordinary blessedness. It belonged to heroes and favored souls in many traditions. The Asphodel Meadows were much more ordinary. They were the destination of those who had lived ordinary lives. And ordinary lives were most lives. There were no great songs written about most of the people who entered Hades. Their names disappeared from history. Their houses changed hands. Their possessions were divided. Their children grew old. Eventually, Even the stories their families told about them became quieter. But mythology imagined that they still existed somewhere. Not vividly, not triumphantly, but as shades moving among the flowers. There is something almost gentle in this idea. The underworld did not require every person to become a hero. It simply made room for them. A farmer who had risen before sunrise for decades. A woman who had woven clothing for her family. A fisherman who knew the coastline by heart. A potter whose hands had shaped hundreds of vessels. A child who had never had the chance to grow old. All could belong to the same endless meadow. Their lives had been different. Their destinations were the same. And perhaps this was part of the comfort the story offered. The dead were not necessarily lost. They had simply gone somewhere beyond the reach of the living. The meadow remained. The flowers continued to grow. The shades continued their quiet wandering. And somewhere beyond the fields, other paths waited. Some led toward judgment, some toward punishment, and some toward places of extraordinary peace. The asphodel meadows were only the beginning, for the underworld had many regions, and not every soul would remain among these flowers forever. But for now, the field stretched quietly beneath the shadowed sky. The newly arrived dead wandered onward, and among them were the countless ordinary people whose lives had passed without songs or monuments. Here at least they had a place, and the quiet kingdom continued to receive them. The asphodel meadows stretched quietly into the distance. For many of the souls who arrived in Hades, there would be no dramatic trial waiting for them, no heroic reward, and no terrible punishment. They would simply remain. This was the fate of most people in the ancient Greek imagination. They had lived ordinary lives, and their deaths did not transform them into legends. Their names might once have been spoken every day, then once a week, then only on special occasions. Eventually, perhaps no one remembered them at all. The realm of the ordinary dead was populated by countless shades. They belonged to Hades. They were part of its population, and they carried with them fragments of what they had once been. A person might still recognize a friend. A mother might recognize her child. But the strength that had animated those memories was gone. This becomes especially clear in the stories of Homer. When Odysseus eventually encounters the dead, he discovers that the shades are not quite like living people. They possess memories, but they lack the substance of life. They cannot simply return to the world above. The boundary remains. There is something poignant about this version of the afterlife. The dead are close enough to recognize, but too far away to touch. This becomes particularly painful when Odysseus meets his mother, Anticlea. She had died while he was away from home. He did not know that he would find her among the dead. When he sees her, he tries to embrace her, but his arms pass through her. She explains that the dead no longer possess the same physical substance as the living. It is one of the quietest moments in Greek mythology. There is no monster, no battle, no thunder from Olympus, only a son trying to hold his mother, and failing. The story captures something the Greeks understood deeply. Death changes relationships. The dead may remain part of memory, but they cannot participate in ordinary life. They cannot speak across the dinner table. They cannot reach out and take someone's hand. They remain beyond the boundary, and yet memory can travel in the opposite direction. The living can remember the dead. This was one reason burial and remembrance mattered so much. A person's physical life ended, but their name could continue. Families visited graves. Offerings were made. The dead were spoken of. Memories were repeated. In this way, the living and the dead remained connected, even though they occupied different worlds. The Greeks also understood that not everyone who entered the underworld had been important. Most lives were not recorded by poets. Most people never fought in famous wars or sailed with legendary heroes. Most never encountered gods. They simply lived. They worked. They grew old. They loved people. They lost people. They watched children grow. They experienced ordinary mornings and ordinary evenings. Their lives were filled with moments that seemed insignificant while they were happening. But collectively, these ordinary lives were the foundation of the ancient world. The mythology of Hades made room for them. There was no requirement that a person become famous before death. The kingdom beneath the earth was enormous enough for everyone. The shades could wander. They could gather. They could remember. And somewhere beyond the ordinary fields, the great figures of mythology also waited. Heroes who had once been celebrated throughout Greece. Kings whose names had become legendary. Warriors whose stories had been repeated for generations. Some of these souls would occupy special places. Others would remain among the dead just as ordinary as everyone else. Death could diminish even greatness. This was especially striking when the living encountered famous heroes below. Odysseus would eventually meet Achilles, the greatest warrior of the Trojan War. He would expect, perhaps, to find Achilles still magnificent. Instead, he would discover a shade who spoke about the value of life itself. The encounter would challenge the idea that glory could make death desirable. For all the stories of heroes, there was something the underworld could not give them. The sunlight, the movement of the body, the ability to choose what tomorrow would bring. The living possessed something the dead could no longer recover. This is why Greek mythology could be both fascinated and unsettled by the afterlife. Hades offered continuity, but not necessarily fulfillment. The dead remained, but they were shadows of themselves. The ordinary soul could wander peacefully among the flowers, but it could never again become the person it had been. And perhaps this is why the ancient Greeks placed such importance on living well. The underworld waited for everyone. But life was temporary. Its joys were temporary. Its difficulties were temporary. Even its most ordinary moments were precious because they could not be repeated forever. The dead in Hades knew this in a way the living could not. They had already crossed the boundary. They had already left behind the world that still belonged to everyone above. And as the countless shades continued their slow existence among the flowers, another question began to emerge. If every soul entered Hades, did every soul remain in the same place? The Greeks imagined that the answer was no. Some souls would be judged. Some would be rewarded. Some would be punished. And for this, the underworld needed judges. 3 figures would eventually appear before the dead. Their task was to determine where each soul belonged. Among them was a man who had once been a king of Crete. His name was Minos. Beyond the quiet fields where ordinary souls wandered, the underworld contained another kind of place. A place of judgment. The ancient Greeks had many different ideas about what happened after death, and not every tradition described the process in the same way. But over time, several figures became associated with judging the souls who entered the kingdom of Hades. They were men who had once lived upon the earth. Now they belonged to the realm below. Their names were Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. Each had been a king in life. Each had become a judge in death. The first was Minos. Minos had been the legendary king of Crete, remembered as a powerful ruler and a figure of enormous authority. In some stories, he was the son of Zeus and Europa. He ruled from Gnosis and became associated with laws and justice. Minos could be wise and just, but he could also be proud, demanding, and ruthless. Like many figures in Greek mythology, he was not simply good or evil. He was human. He made mistakes. He angered gods. He demanded obedience. And after his death, his reputation for judgment took on a new meaning. In the underworld, Minos held a golden scepter and served as one of the judges of the dead. But Minos was not alone. His brother Rhadamanthus was also remembered as a great ruler. Rhadamanthus had a reputation for fairness and wisdom. In some traditions, he had been forced to leave Crete and eventually became associated with Elysium, the blessed realm of the dead. There, he was imagined as a judge who dealt with souls who had reached a particularly fortunate destination. The third judge was Aeacus. His story connected him with the island of Aegina. Aeacus was said to have been the son of Zeus and Aegina, and he became a respected king. One tradition tells of a terrible plague that devastated his kingdom. After the people of Aegina died, Aeacus prayed for help. The gods responded by transforming ants into human beings. These people became the Myrmidons, a legendary race of warriors who would later follow Achilles during the Trojan War. Aeacus' reputation for fairness continued beyond his mortal life. In Hades, he became another judge of the dead. Together, the three formed a symbolic court. But what exactly did they judge? The answer was not always clear. Different poets and traditions imagined different arrangements. In some stories, the ordinary dead simply continued into their designated region. In others, the judges determined which souls belonged in places of reward or punishment. The important point was that the underworld was not entirely chaotic. There was order, there were rules, there were boundaries, and there was a sense that a person's actions could matter beyond the end of life. This reflected something important about Greek culture. Justice was a concern throughout the ancient world. Kings were expected to judge disputes. Communities created laws. People argued over fairness and punishment. The idea that such questions might continue after death was natural. If justice could fail during a person's lifetime, perhaps it could be completed afterward. A person who had escaped punishment on earth might not escape forever. And someone who had suffered unjustly might eventually receive recognition. The underworld, therefore, became a place where moral order could be imagined on an enormous scale. But the judges were not necessarily looking for perfection. The ordinary dead were not all heroes. They were not all villains. Most were simply human beings. The great division in the mythology came when considering those who had lived extraordinary lives. Some had committed terrible offenses against the gods. Others had been exceptionally virtuous, heroic, or favored by divine powers. Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus continued their solemn work. One soul after another appeared before them. The judges looked backward at what each person had been. Then they determined where that soul would go. For the newly arrived dead, this was the moment when the road finally divided. The judgment was complete. Greek mythology did not offer a single, universal map of the afterlife. Some traditions described a broad realm where nearly everyone wandered together. Others developed a more detailed system, dividing the dead according to their lives, their deeds, and the favor of the gods. Over time, three destinations became especially familiar: the Asphodel Meadows, Elysium, and Tartarus. Each represented a different possibility. The first was the ordinary realm of the dead. The second was a place of extraordinary peace. The third was a place of punishment and imprisonment. Together, They gave the Greeks a way to imagine the many possible endings of a human life. The asphodel meadows were the broadest of these destinations. This was where the ordinary souls could remain, neither rewarded with extraordinary happiness nor condemned to extraordinary suffering. Their lives had been ordinary. Their afterlife was ordinary too. They wandered among pale flowers, existing as shades and carrying fragments of memory. There was no great glory waiting for them, but there was also no terrible punishment. They simply remained within the quiet order of Hades. For most people, this was enough. Greek mythology was not always so absolute. It allowed for an enormous middle ground. Most people were not legendary heroes. Most people were not monstrous criminals. Most people were simply human. Their lives contained kindness and selfishness, courage and fear, success and failure. The asphodel meadows gave those complicated lives a place to continue. But there were others whose lives had been extraordinary. Some had been favored by the gods. Some had performed great deeds. Some belonged to heroic families. For them, mythology imagined a different destination. Elysium. The name itself carried a sense of remoteness. Elysium was not simply another meadow within Hades. It was a blessed place, a region where the dead could experience a peaceful existence free from many of the hardships that had accompanied mortal life. In early traditions, Elysium was associated particularly with heroes and those favored by the gods. Over time, the idea developed. The boundaries of Elysium became less certain, and later traditions connected it with the Isles of the Blessed. The afterlife became increasingly beautiful. It was the fulfillment of a particular Greek dream. Not endless excitement, not endless achievement, simply peace. The third destination was very different. Tartarus. If Elysium represented the heights of reward, Tartarus represented the deepest depths of punishment. But Tartarus was not originally imagined as simply the Greek equivalent of an eternal hell. It was much older. It was a primordial cosmic region, associated with enormous depth and darkness. It was a place where powerful beings could be imprisoned. The Titans were confined there after their defeat by Zeus. Over time, Tartarus also became associated with the punishment of certain mortals who had committed extraordinary offenses. Their crimes were not ordinary. They were often acts of hubris against the gods, betrayals of divine hospitality, or violations of fundamental boundaries. Their punishments were equally extraordinary. Sisyphus was condemned to push a great stone uphill, only to watch it roll back down. Tantalus stood beside food and water that always remained just beyond his reach. Ixion was bound to an ever-turning wheel. The Danaids were given a vessel that could never be filled. Each punishment reflected the nature of the offense. The man who had tried to outwit death was forced into endless repetition. The man who had abused divine generosity was surrounded by abundance he could never enjoy. The man who had committed betrayal was bound to a wheel that offered no escape. The underworld therefore became a place where actions had consequences. The underworld could be frightening without being entirely cruel. It could be peaceful without being completely joyful. It could offer justice while still leaving room for mystery. The three destinations gave shape to these possibilities. The ordinary dead wandered through asphodel. The blessed found their way toward Elysium, and the most deeply condemned descended toward Tartarus. Three paths, three different images of what might wait beyond death. Yet there was another destination that would become especially important in later Greek thought. A place not merely for those who had been lucky or heroic, but for souls who had passed through repeated lives and gradually become purified. Some traditions imagine the possibility of returning to the world above. A soul might drink from Lethe, forget its former existence, and begin again. Others spoke of souls who could choose to remember. The afterlife, in these traditions, was no longer a final stopping place. It could become part of a cycle. Death could lead to rebirth. Rebirth could lead to another life, and another death. The soul might continue moving between worlds until it had learned, suffered, purified, or transformed enough to escape the cycle. These ideas would become increasingly important in later Greek philosophy and religious traditions. But for now, the ordinary geography of Hades remained. Fields of pale flowers, blessed lands beyond them, and the deep darkness of Tartarus far below. Our journey will now move toward the brightest of these destinations. The winds are gentle there, the fields are green, and the souls who have been especially favored have found their way to Elysium. Elysium, the name itself carried an air of mystery. It was a distant destination, removed from the ordinary paths of the dead. In some of the oldest surviving traditions, Elysium was described as a special dwelling at the far edge of the world, reserved for a select few who had been favored by the gods. These fortunate souls did not suffer the ordinary fate of the dead. They lived in a peaceful land where existence could continue without the hardships that made mortal life so difficult. Later writers developed the idea further. Elysium became increasingly associated with reward after death, and eventually with the Isles of the Blessed. The geography changed, but the central idea remained. Some souls could receive a beautiful existence beyond ordinary mortality. The Greeks had spent their lives surrounded by uncertainty. Harvests could fail. Storms could destroy ships. Illness could arrive without warning. War could interrupt a peaceful life. Even the most successful person could lose everything through a single turn of fortune. Elysium offered an imagined world in which these uncertainties had finally disappeared. There was no need to struggle for survival. No harvest needed to be gathered before winter. No ship needed to be repaired before the next voyage. No army needed to be assembled. No political rival needed to be defeated. The dead could simply exist. The peace was not necessarily one of constant excitement. It was a quiet kind of happiness, the company of other blessed souls. Time without urgency. Elysium almost feels like a distant change in the quality of the air. The darkness has not entirely vanished, but it has softened. The landscape opens. The paths become easier. The souls no longer wander as shadows among the ordinary dead. They have been granted something more. In some traditions, heroes were especially likely to reach this blessed realm. The Greeks placed enormous importance on heroic reputation. A hero could die young and still be remembered for centuries. Achilles, Heracles, and other legendary figures were celebrated not because they avoided death, but because their lives became larger than ordinary mortality. Their names survived. Their stories survived. Their deeds were repeated. Elysium offered another way for such figures to continue beyond death. But heroism was not the only path. Divine favor mattered. Some mortals were simply loved by the gods. Others belonged to families with extraordinary connections to the divine. The mythology, therefore, did not always present Elysium as a reward that could be earned through a simple list of good deeds. It was often a matter of destiny, divine favor, or exceptional status. That ambiguity makes Elysium different from many later ideas of paradise. It was not always a moral reward in the modern sense. It was a place for the fortunate, and fortune was a powerful force in Greek thought. A person could work hard and still fail. Another could stumble into success. The gods could help one person and hinder another. The word for fortune, Tyche, became the name of a goddess associated with chance and prosperity. Elysium fit naturally into this worldview. To reach it was to be among those whom fate had treated kindly. Yet the most beautiful descriptions of Elysium came from the imagination of poets. They pictured a land where life continued without its harshest edges. There was no bitter cold, no exhausting labor, no hunger, no disease. The souls could enjoy music, conversation, games, and peaceful surroundings. In this sense, Elysium did not completely reject life. It preserved the best parts of it: friendship without loss, pleasure without exhaustion, beauty without decay, time without fear, and perhaps most importantly, existence without the knowledge that it must eventually end. The living could enjoy a beautiful afternoon while secretly knowing that evening would come. The people of Elysium no longer needed to worry about evening. They had already crossed beyond it. The later tradition of the Isles of the Blessed made the image even more remote. Rather than simply being another region within the underworld, the Blessed Isles could be imagined as lying at the edge of the world, far beyond ordinary human travel. The souls there lived in a place separated from the struggles of mortal existence. Some stories imagined heroes being allowed to return there again and again, living peacefully through successive ages. Others connected the islands with reincarnation and the possibility of eventually escaping the cycle of mortal life. The details changed. The dream remained, a place where the soul could finally rest, a place where the troubles of the world could no longer reach it, a place beyond ordinary grief. And perhaps that is why Elysium became such a lasting image. The Greeks were familiar with death. They lived with it constantly. They buried their relatives. They lost children. They watched warriors leave and sometimes never return. They knew that even the brightest life eventually ended. Elysium allowed them to imagine that something beautiful might exist beyond that ending. Not for everyone. Not necessarily forever in every tradition, but for some fortunate souls, there could be another landscape waiting. Yet Elysium was not the deepest or most extraordinary version of this paradise. Beyond it lay an even more remote destination, the Isles of the Blessed. There, the greatest heroes and most fortunate souls could live beyond the ordinary boundaries of the dead. And to understand that place, we must travel farther still, toward the edge of the ancient Greek world. Far beyond the familiar landscapes of the dead, the Greek imagination placed another destination. It was more distant than Elysium, more mysterious, and reserved, in many traditions, for those whose lives had been touched by extraordinary fortune. These were the Isles of the Blessed. The ancient Greeks loved the idea of islands at the edge of the world, beyond the familiar coastline, beyond the routes followed by ordinary sailors. There were imagined places where the rules of everyday life no longer seemed to apply. It was natural to imagine that something remarkable might exist there. Perhaps a shore untouched by ordinary time. Perhaps a garden where the gods had hidden their treasures. Or perhaps islands where the greatest souls could live peacefully after death. The Isles of the Blessed belonged to this distant geography. Their exact location was never certain, but they were consistently remote. The journey to them was not simply another road through Hades. It was a movement toward the farthest boundary of the known world. There, the ordinary rules of mortality became softer. The souls who reached the islands were sometimes described as heroes, especially favored mortals, or people who had achieved an unusual degree of blessedness. They had already passed through the ordinary experience of death. Now they were granted something beyond it, a peaceful existence that could continue without the burdens that had followed them during life. The landscape was imagined as beautiful. The souls could spend their days in leisure. The idea may sound simple, but it reflected a powerful desire. The Greeks understood that mortal happiness was fragile. A beautiful day could be followed by a storm. A successful harvest could be ruined the next year. A friendship could end. A loved one could die. A young person could become old. Even heroes who seemed almost invincible could eventually fall. The Isles of the Blessed imagined an existence in which these changes had stopped. The blessed had already crossed that boundary. Now they could simply remain. The Greeks had always been fascinated by the possibility that exceptional people might somehow continue beyond ordinary death. Heracles, for example, had an unusual fate. His mortal existence ended in fire, but his divine nature allowed him to join the gods. Achilles, too, occupied an unusual place in later traditions. The great heroes were never entirely confined to ordinary categories. They belonged partly to history, partly to legend, and partly to the world of the gods. The Isles of the Blessed provided a place for such figures to continue. But the islands were not simply a reward for fame. Their mythology also became connected with ideas of reincarnation. A soul might live one mortal life, die, and enter the afterlife. Then, rather than remaining there forever, it could return to the world. It might be born again, live another life, die again, and continue through a cycle of existence. The Isles of the Blessed could therefore become more than a paradise. They could become the destination of a soul that had finally passed beyond the ordinary cycle of suffering and death. Death did not always have to be the absolute opposite of life. It could be a transition, a passage, perhaps even a stage in a much larger journey. The soul might move from the world above to the world below, and from there to another life. Or it might eventually reach a place where it no longer needed to return. The Isles represented the possibility of rest after all those journeys. Imagine reaching them after having crossed the rivers of Hades. The waters are behind you. The gray fields are behind you. The distant gates are behind you. Ahead is the sea. The shore is warm beneath your feet. A gentle breeze moves across the grass. There is no command waiting for you, no task, no trial, no appointment with destiny, only time. And for someone who had spent a lifetime working, fighting, worrying, and wondering what tomorrow might bring, perhaps that was the greatest reward of all, to have nowhere else to go. The ancient Greeks also connected these blessed lands with the larger geography of the Western world. The setting sun became part of the mythology. Every evening, the sun appeared to descend toward the horizon, disappearing beyond the sea. What happened after it vanished? Myth could provide an answer. The gods and heroes might travel into the western darkness. The sun could journey through hidden regions before rising again. The boundary between day and night, east and west, life and death, could all become connected in the imagination. The Isles of the Blessed belonged to that mysterious western horizon. They were somewhere beyond ordinary knowledge. And perhaps that was exactly what made them beautiful. A paradise that could be completely mapped would become familiar. But these islands remained distant. They existed just beyond the edge of certainty. But not everything beneath the earth was peaceful. Far below the ordinary fields, beyond the places where most souls wandered, there was a region older than Hades himself. A place so deep that even the gods treated it with caution. It was not simply another destination for the dead. It was a cosmic prison, a place where ancient powers had been confined after the war that changed the universe. Its name was Tartarus, and now, leaving the peaceful islands behind, our journey will begin to descend. Far beneath the quiet fields of Hades lay a place of a different kind. Tartarus. It was not simply another neighborhood within Hades. Tartarus was older, darker. In the oldest Greek stories, Tartarus was not created as a prison for mortal sinners. It was a primordial region of the cosmos, as ancient as some of the earliest divine powers. Hesiod imagined it as a place of enormous depth, far below the earth. He described the distance between the earth and Tartarus as unimaginably vast. The idea was almost mathematical in its scale. If a bronze object were thrown from the heavens, it would fall for a very long time before reaching the earth. And if the same object were thrown from the earth toward Tartarus, it would take an equally immense journey before reaching its destination. Tartarus was therefore not simply underground. It was beneath underground, a depth beyond ordinary human understanding. The Greeks imagined the cosmos as having layers: the heavens above, the earth in the middle, the realm of the dead beneath it, and deeper still, Tartarus. It was a place at the bottom of creation. Its darkness was not merely the absence of sunlight. It was something more fundamental, a primordial darkness belonging to the oldest structure of the universe. And this is where the defeated Titans were eventually imprisoned. To understand why, we must return briefly to the great conflict that had shaped the world. Cronus had once ruled the cosmos. The Titans had held power. Then Zeus and the younger gods rose against them. The war lasted for years. Eventually, Zeus and his allies won. The Titans who had fought against the new order were defeated. Some were imprisoned in Tartarus. The ancient rulers were now beneath the world they had once controlled. It was a reversal of cosmic power. Those who had stood at the top had been cast to the bottom. And their prison was not an ordinary dungeon. It was protected by enormous walls and gates. The Cyclopes were said to have constructed its bronze barriers. Powerful guardians watched over the prisoners. The Titans could not simply walk out. They had been removed from the world above and confined to the deepest region of creation. There was something symbolic about this. The new gods ruled Olympus. The old gods slept below. A new age had begun. But the old powers had not completely disappeared. They remained beneath the earth, reminders of a time before Zeus. Tartarus therefore represented more than punishment. It represented the containment of ancient chaos. The universe had been reorganized, but the forces that came before had not been erased. They had simply been pushed into the depths. The mythology of Tartarus later expanded. Poets began placing certain legendary mortals there as well. These were not ordinary wrongdoers. Greek mythology did not imagine every person who behaved badly being sent into Tartarus. The punishments were reserved for extraordinary offenses. Sisyphus had attempted to deceive the gods and even death itself. Tantalus had committed terrible offenses against divine beings. Ixion had violated sacred hospitality and betrayed those who had shown him favor. Their stories were meant to show what could happen when a mortal crossed boundaries that the gods considered sacred. Tartarus became the place where such stories could unfold. Yet even here, the mythology was not always consistent. Some traditions treated Tartarus as a cosmic prison. Others emphasized its role as a place of punishment. Still others blurred the distinction between Tartarus and the deepest regions of Hades. This uncertainty is important. The Greeks did not possess a single official map of the afterlife. The underworld evolved through poetry and storytelling. Its landscapes overlapped. Its boundaries shifted. One writer might describe a river in one place, while another placed it somewhere else. A poet might imagine Elysium at the edge of the world, while a later tradition connected it more closely with the realm of Hades. Tartarus remained one of the most stable ideas because its purpose was so powerful. It was the bottom, the place beneath all other places, the final depth. And as we descend toward it, the world becomes increasingly distant. The sounds of the ordinary dead disappear. The pale flowers of asphodel are gone. There are no gentle breezes here, no green islands, no sunlight, only stone, darkness, and the distant echoes of powers that existed before the Olympian gods. The Titans remained in their prison. Cronus and the others who had lost the cosmic war were now shadows of an older order. Above them, Zeus ruled. Above them, the world continued. Generations of mortals would be born and die without ever knowing that these ancient beings remained beneath their feet. The earth might appear peaceful. Mountains would rise. Rivers would flow. Cities would grow. Children would play in fields. Yet deep below, Tartarus waited. It was a reminder that the universe had not always been as it was. Before Olympus, there had been the Titans. Before the Titans, there had been even older forces. And beneath everything was a darkness that belonged to the beginning of creation itself. The journey has reached one of the oldest depths of Greek mythology. But Tartarus was not empty. The defeated Titans were there. And among them stood the ancient ruler who had once swallowed his own children in an attempt to prevent this very fate. Cronus. His reign had ended. His kingdom was gone. And now he remained beneath the earth, in the darkness of Tartarus, where the story of the old gods would continue in silence. Before Zeus sat upon Olympus, before the gods of the younger generation divided the heavens, sea, and underworld, the Titans had been the great powers of creation. Their age had passed. Now they lived in darkness. The Titans were immensely strong. They belonged to an older generation of divine beings. If they remained free, the new order could always be challenged. So Tartarus became their prison. Deep beneath the earth, beyond the ordinary realm of the dead, the Titans were confined. The place was guarded. Its gates were immense. Its walls were difficult to cross. The darkness was almost complete. For the first time, beings who had once commanded the cosmos found themselves with nowhere to go. There is something strangely quiet about imagining the Titans there. They were not mortal prisoners. They did not age as human beings did. They did not die. Their punishment was something more unusual. They simply remained. The world continued without them. Above, the Olympians established their order. Zeus became king of the gods. Poseidon ruled the sea. Hades governed the dead. Demeter watched over the harvest. Hera became queen of Olympus. Apollo, Artemis, Athena, Aphrodite, Hermes, and the other younger gods became part of the new divine world. The Titans were no longer part of everyday life. Their names became memories of an older age. Yet not every Titan shared the same fate. Some had supported Zeus during the war. The Titan Oceanus, for example, generally remained apart from the conflict. Prometheus, another Titan, sided with Zeus and later became famous for giving fire to humanity. Atlas suffered a different punishment. He was condemned to hold the heavens upon his shoulders. The mythology, therefore, did not treat every Titan as an enemy. The war had divided the older generation. Some were imprisoned. Some survived. Some became part of the new order. This makes Tartarus less like a simple prison filled with villains and more like a monument to the transformation of the cosmos. The old order had not vanished. It had been pushed downward, and perhaps that was why Tartarus felt so ancient. The darkness belonged to a time before the familiar gods, before the temples, before the great heroes, before the cities of Greece. The Titans represented the memory of that earlier universe. Their presence beneath the earth reminded the Greeks that the world had changed before, and that divine power was never necessarily permanent. Even Zeus, despite his extraordinary authority, was part of a story about succession. He had defeated his father. His father had defeated his own. The generations of gods replaced one another. Creation itself seemed to move through cycles of power. Far above Tartarus, mortals lived their short lives without thinking about any of this. They planted crops. They built houses. They sailed across the sea. They looked toward Mount Olympus and imagined the gods watching over them. Few would ever imagine that beneath their feet, the oldest powers were still waiting in darkness. And perhaps the Titans themselves could sense the passage of the ages. Kingdoms rose above them. Kingdoms disappeared. New languages developed. New generations were born. Heroes became legends. Cities that had not yet been founded eventually became ruins. Still, Tartarus remained. The prisoners remained. Time passed differently for the immortal. 100 years meant little. 1,000 years meant little. The Titans could wait. There was no morning to greet them, no evening to bring rest, no changing seasons, only the deep silence of the place beneath the world. Yet Tartarus was not entirely filled with ancient gods. As Greek mythology developed, other figures were imagined descending into its darkness. They were mortals whose actions had crossed extraordinary boundaries. Their stories would become some of the most memorable tales of punishment in the underworld. One of them had attempted to cheat death itself. Another had offended the gods through an act of terrible betrayal. Another had been condemned to an endless wheel. Their punishments were not random. Each was designed to reflect the person's actions. And perhaps no story captured this idea more clearly than that of Sisyphus. He had been clever enough to deceive gods and death, but cleverness could not save him forever. Eventually, his journey led downward, to Tartarus, and there, waiting for him, was a single enormous stone. The stone would become his entire world. He would push it upward. It would roll back down, and he would begin again, forever. Sisyphus was the legendary king of Corinth, a city positioned beside an important stretch of the Greek world. He was known for intelligence, cleverness, and an unusual ability to find his way out of difficult situations. But in Greek mythology, cleverness could become dangerous when it was used against the gods. Sisyphus was not satisfied with simply being a successful king. He wanted to know secrets that belonged to the immortals. And eventually, he discovered something he was not supposed to know. The god Zeus had taken the form of an eagle and carried away Aegina, the daughter of the river god Asopus. When Asopus came searching for his daughter, Sisyphus knew where she had gone. He also knew that the information could be valuable. So he offered to tell Asopus what had happened in exchange for a spring of fresh water for Corinth. The bargain was made. Sisyphus gained his spring. But Zeus discovered that the secret had been revealed. The king had interfered in the affairs of the gods, and Zeus decided that he had to be punished. He sent Thanatos, the personification of death, to take Sisyphus away. But Sisyphus had another trick ready. He managed to deceive Thanatos and bind him. For a time, Death itself could no longer perform its work. No one could die. The natural order had been interrupted. The consequences soon became impossible to ignore. Wounded warriors remained alive. The elderly could not pass away. The world became strangely crowded with people who should have reached the end of their lives. Eventually, Ares became angry. War had lost its meaning if no one could die. So the god of war intervened. Thanatos was freed, and Sisyphus was finally taken to the underworld. But even then, he had one more plan. Before his death, he had secretly instructed his wife not to perform the proper funeral rites for him. When he arrived in Hades, he complained to Persephone that he had been improperly buried. He asked permission to return briefly to the world of the living so that he could arrange his own funeral. Persephone allowed him to go. Sisyphus returned to Corinth, and once he was back beneath the sunlight, he simply refused to return. For a while, he lived again. He enjoyed the world he had escaped. He breathed the air. He saw the sky. He walked through the city he ruled. But immortality was not his. Eventually, the gods came for him again. This time there would be no escape. Sisyphus was taken back to the underworld and brought before his final punishment. A huge stone waited for him. It was enormous, heavy, and impossible to move easily. His task was simple: push it uphill. Sisyphus placed his hands against the stone. He leaned forward. His feet pressed into the earth. Slowly, the stone began to move. Upward, step by step. The slope grew steeper. The weight became heavier. Still, Sisyphus continued. He pushed. He strained. He climbed. At last, after tremendous effort, the stone approached the top. For a moment, victory seemed possible. The summit was close. But then the stone slipped. It rolled away from him. Down the mountain it went. Sisyphus watched it descend. Then he had to follow and begin again. This was the punishment. Not a single moment of pain. Not one terrible day. But repetition. The same task. The same mountain. The same stone. The same failure. Forever. The story became one of the clearest Greek images of eternal punishment because the punishment reflected Sisyphus himself. He had spent his life trying to outsmart limits. He had attempted to deceive the gods. He had tried to escape death. He had repeatedly believed that there was always another trick, another argument, another way around the rules. Now he was given an endless task with no solution. There was no secret passage, no clever bargain, no loophole, only the stone, only the mountain, only the return to the bottom. And yet the story leaves room for a strangely human image. Imagine Sisyphus standing once again at the foot of the hill. The stone waits beside him. He places both hands against it. He pushes. The great weight begins to move. For a moment, everything is quiet. There is only the sound of his footsteps and the scrape of stone against earth. Upward he goes. The underworld stretches silently around him. Far away, the other souls continue their own stories. Some wander through the meadows. Some rest among the blessed. Others remain in darker places. But Sisyphus has only one road. Then down. Then down. The punishment never needs to be explained to him again. He knows exactly what will happen. And still, each time he pushes. His story would eventually become a symbol far beyond ancient Greece. The image of a person repeating an impossible task became a way of thinking about struggle, frustration, and the strange persistence of human beings. But in the mythology itself, there was no philosophical comfort at the top of the hill. There was simply the stone, and beneath it, the endless mountain. Sisyphus was not the only mortal condemned to an eternal punishment. Another king had offended the gods in a very different way. His crime involved a feast, a terrible betrayal, and a dish that should never have been served. His name was Tantalus, and his punishment would be one of the most haunting in all of Tartarus. In life, Tantalus had been a king and, according to many traditions, a son of Zeus. Unlike ordinary mortals, he had been granted an unusual privilege. The gods welcomed him among them. He was allowed to share their meals. He heard conversations that ordinary people could never hear. He knew secrets belonging to the divine world. For a mortal to be invited into such company was an extraordinary honor. But Tantalus did not treat the privilege with gratitude. He began to believe that the distance between himself and the gods was smaller than it really was. He became careless, and eventually he committed an act that could not be forgiven. The ancient stories differ in their details, but one of the most famous versions tells that Tantalus stole food from the gods and brought their secrets back to humanity. He had been trusted with things that belonged to Olympus. He treated that trust as though it meant nothing. But there was an even darker story. Tantalus wanted to test the gods. He wondered whether they truly possessed the wisdom and divine knowledge people claimed. So he prepared a terrible feast. His own son, Pelops, became part of the story. Tantalus killed the boy and served his flesh to the gods. The meal was placed before them as though nothing unusual had happened. The gods immediately understood what Tantalus had done. They knew what was on the table. The story is one of the most disturbing in Greek mythology, but it also illustrates an ancient idea about hospitality. A guest should be treated with respect. A host had obligations. And when gods entered a household, the rules of hospitality became sacred. Tantalus had violated all of them. The gods rejected the feast. Most of them knew exactly what had happened. Only Demeter, distracted by grief for her daughter Persephone, unknowingly ate a small portion of Pelops' shoulder. The gods restored Pelops to life. Where the missing piece had been, they gave him an ivory shoulder. The boy returned to the world of the living. But Tantalus did not escape his punishment. He was sent to Tartarus. And there, his suffering took a form that became famous throughout the ancient world. He stood in a pool of clear water. Above him hung branches filled with beautiful fruit. Everything he wanted was within reach. The water appeared cool. The fruit looked ripe. There was enough to satisfy any hunger or thirst. But whenever Tantalus bent down to drink, the water receded. He reached again. It moved away again. Whenever he stretched toward the fruit, the branches lifted beyond his fingers. He could see the food. He could smell it. He could almost touch it. But he could never have it. His punishment was not simply hunger. It was the endless presence of what he desired. The Greeks had a word for this kind of torment, the frustration of wanting something that always remains just beyond reach. Tantalus could see exactly what would satisfy him. That made the punishment worse. If there had been no water, he might have accepted his thirst. If there had been no fruit, he might have understood that there was nothing to eat. But the water was there. The fruit was there. Everything appeared possible. And possibility was the cruelest part. Imagine the quiet of Tartarus around him. No crowds. No changing seasons. No passing years that could bring relief. Only the branches above. Only the water below. Only the repeated movement of his hands. He reaches. The fruit rises. He bends. The water disappears. He tries again, and again, and again. There is no conclusion, no moment when the punishment finally ends. This was what made the punishments of Tartarus so different from ordinary suffering. They were designed around eternity. A mortal punishment eventually reaches its final moment. A prison sentence ends. A wound heals. A difficult journey reaches its destination. But the punishments of Tartarus had no destination. They repeated forever. Sisyphus would always return to the bottom of his mountain. Tantalus would always remain hungry and thirsty. The punishment had become the whole of their existence. The stories also carried warnings for those still living. Tantalus represented the danger of abusing divine favor. He had been given access to the gods. Instead of treating that privilege with humility, he had treated it as an opportunity. His punishment therefore involved something he could never possess. He had once been invited to divine abundance. Now abundance surrounded him while remaining completely inaccessible. The contrast was deliberate. The gods had shared their food with him. Now food was forever denied. The connection between crime and punishment was unmistakable. Greek mythology often used this kind of symmetry. A person's greatest desire could become the instrument of their suffering. Their greatest strength could become their weakness. Their cleverness could become their trap. The underworld was not simply a place where pain happened. It was a place where stories reached their final meaning. And yet, even Tantalus was not the last of those who suffered below. There were other figures whose punishments became equally famous. One of them was Ixion. He had committed a terrible violation of hospitality and then attempted to escape the consequences. But unlike Tantalus, whose punishment was almost motionless, Ixion's would never allow him to rest. Like Tantalus, Ixion had once lived as a powerful king. He ruled the Lapiths in Thessaly and possessed the kind of authority that could make a mortal feel almost equal to the gods. But power brought responsibilities, and Ixion repeatedly ignored them. His story began with a crime against his own family. Ixion had married Dia, the daughter of Dionysus, and her father expected the traditional gifts that accompanied a marriage. Ixion promised to provide them, but when Dionysus later demanded what had been promised, Ixion refused. The disagreement became bitter. Eventually, Ixion invited Dionysus to a feast. It should have been an opportunity to settle their differences. Instead, Ixion prepared a trap. He arranged for Dionysus to fall into a pit of burning coals. His father-in-law died. The crime was shocking not only because of the murder itself, but because Ixion had violated the sacred expectations of hospitality. A guest was supposed to be protected. A host was supposed to provide safety. Ixion had turned the guest's trust against him. For this crime, ordinary human society had no place for him. He was rejected by his own people. He became an outcast. But Zeus took pity on him. The king of the gods allowed Ixion to come to Olympus and purified him of his crime. It was an extraordinary act of mercy. A mortal who had committed murder was given a chance to begin again. For a time, Ixion seemed to have been forgiven, but he did not remain grateful. Instead, he became fascinated by Hera, the wife of Zeus. Ixion desired her. The desire itself was dangerous enough, but Ixion went further. He attempted to approach Hera. Zeus discovered what he was planning. Rather than allowing Ixion to harm the goddess, Zeus created a cloud in the shape of Hera. The cloud was called Nephili. Ixion was deceived. He believed he had succeeded in his desire. From the strange union came a monstrous offspring associated with the centaurs. The details vary across ancient traditions, but the essential story remained. Ixion had received forgiveness. He had been welcomed among the gods. and he had betrayed that mercy almost immediately. Zeus finally decided that ordinary punishment was not enough. Ixion was condemned to Tartarus. There, the punishment waiting for him was unlike that of Sisyphus or Tantalus. A great wheel was prepared, Ixion was bound to it, and the wheel was set spinning. Round and round it turned. There was no final revolution, no point where the motion stopped, no moment when Ixion could step away. The wheel carried him endlessly through the darkness. In some traditions, the wheel was described as a fiery wheel. Its movement became a symbol of endless suffering. Unlike Sisyphus, Ixion did not struggle toward a goal. There was no summit waiting for him. He simply turned, and again, and again. The contrast between the two punishments was striking. Sisyphus was given an impossible task. Ixion was given endless motion. One always tried to reach the top. The other could never escape the circle. Both punishments shared the same central idea. There would be no completion. The Greeks often imagined eternity through repetition. A task performed forever. A wheel turning forever. A hunger that could never be satisfied. The endless repetition made the punishment impossible to escape. And Ixion's story carried another warning. The ancient Greeks placed enormous importance on hospitality, a concept often described by the word xenia. A host was expected to protect a guest. A guest was expected to respect the household that welcomed him. These obligations could extend even between strangers. The gods themselves were believed to watch over such customs. To violate them was therefore more serious than breaking an ordinary social rule. Ixion had done it more than once. He had murdered someone who trusted him. Then he had abused the hospitality of Zeus. His punishment reflected the seriousness of his betrayal. But the wheel also represented something else. Ixion had once been given a second chance. He could have returned to the world as a changed man. Instead, he repeated his mistakes. Now repetition became his eternal fate. There was no escape from the pattern he had created. The wheel continued turning. The underworld remained silent around him. Far above, the living world continued to change. Children were born. Kings died. Cities grew. New generations forgot old ones. But Ixion did not change. He remained fixed within the same endless motion. The story of Tartarus was therefore not simply a collection of frightening tales. Each punishment carried a lesson. Sisyphus could never complete his task. Tantalus could never satisfy his desires. Ixion could never stop moving. The condemned were trapped not merely by physical restraints, but by the patterns of their own stories. Their punishments had become symbols of what they had done. And still, there were other souls below. One of the most unusual was the group known as the Danaids. They were not remembered for a single crime committed by one person. The darkness of Tartarus held another group of souls whose punishment was built around an impossible task. They were the Danaids. Their story began not in the underworld, but in the distant past of Argos. Their father was Danaids, a powerful king who had 50 daughters. His brother, Eurydice, had 50 sons. The two families were connected by blood, but they did not live peacefully. A dispute grew between the brothers. Eventually, Eurydice proposed that his 50 sons marry the 50 daughters of Danaids. It appeared to be a way of ending the conflict. But Danaids did not trust his brother. He feared that the marriages were a trap. So he and his daughters fled Argos and sailed across the sea. They sought protection elsewhere. But Eurydice's sons followed. The conflict could not be escaped so easily. Eventually, the marriages took place. But Danaids secretly instructed his daughters to kill their husbands on their wedding night. Each daughter was given a weapon. The plan was carried out. One by one, the husbands were killed, all except one. One of the Danaids, Hypermnestra, refused to kill her husband, Lynceus. She allowed him to escape. Her act of mercy saved him. The other sisters, however, followed their father's command. Their story became associated with bloodshed, family loyalty, and the terrible consequences of obeying an unjust order. After death, the sisters were given their punishment in Tartarus. They were ordered to carry water. Each woman carried a vessel and attempted to fill a great container. But there was a problem. The vessel had no bottom. The water immediately poured away. No matter how much they carried, the container never filled. They returned for more. They poured again. And again the water disappeared. Their task could never be completed. Like the punishments of Sisyphus and Ixion, the punishment depended upon repetition. But this one had a different quality. There was no mountain, no wheel, no fruit, only water. The Danaids carried it, poured it, watched it vanish, then returned for more. The image was simple enough to understand, yet strangely haunting. A person can work endlessly and still accomplish nothing. Effort alone does not guarantee completion. The Danaids could carry as much water as they wanted. The vessel would never become full. The task itself was impossible. In some traditions, the punishment was given specifically to the 49 daughters who had killed their husbands. Hypermnestra was spared because she had refused to participate. Her decision became important because it showed that the sisters were not all bound by the same fate. She had listened to her conscience instead of following the command. Her story provided a contrast to the others. One choice had changed the course of an entire life. Meanwhile, the rest remained in Tartarus. Their endless work continued. The ancient Greeks were familiar with the physical labor of carrying water. Before modern plumbing, obtaining water could be a daily task. People carried vessels from springs and wells. They knew the weight of water. They understood how quickly it could spill. They knew the frustration of a broken container. The punishment, therefore, transformed an ordinary chore into eternity. The Danaids could never set the vessel down and say they were finished. There was always more to carry. Always another journey, always another empty container. The story became a symbol of useless labor. Later generations would use the image of the Danaids when describing tasks that consume enormous effort without producing a result. But within the mythology, their punishment had a deeper meaning. The underworld was showing that actions had consequences. The sisters had participated in a terrible act of violence. Now they were trapped in a task that could never be completed. Their lives had been shaped by the demands of family. Their deaths had been shaped by judgment, and their existence in Tartarus became an endless repetition of effort without resolution. The image is almost strangely peaceful when imagined from a distance. A dark landscape, a group of figures walking slowly toward a pool. Each carries a vessel. They fill it. They walk. They pour. The water disappears. Then they turn around. There is no shouting, no dramatic battle, only footsteps, water, and silence. The punishment does not need to become louder. It is frightening because it never changes. The underworld contains many forms of eternity. For some souls, eternity means wandering. For others, it means peace. For the condemned, it can mean repetition. A stone rolling downward, a wheel turning, a branch moving away, a vessel draining, the same moments returning forever. Yet the Greeks did not imagine Tartarus as the destination of every soul. The overwhelming majority of the dead were not condemned to these punishments. They remained in the ordinary regions of the underworld. The stories of Tartarus were exceptional. They were cautionary tales told about people who had crossed extraordinary boundaries. And there was one final group whose fate was different from all the others. They were not mortal kings. They were not ordinary souls. They were ancient divine beings who had existed before the Olympians. The Titans remained imprisoned below, and among them was one figure whose punishment was unlike any other. Plus, he had fought against Zeus during the Great War. After the Titans were defeated, Atlas was not simply imprisoned in Tartarus. Atlas was a Titan. He belonged to the generation that had ruled the cosmos before Zeus and the Olympians. When the Great War between the Titans and the younger gods began, Atlas fought against Zeus. Atlas received one of the most famous punishments of all. He was condemned to hold the heavens upon his shoulders. Modern stories often portray Atlas as carrying the earth itself, but in the ancient Greek tradition, his burden was the heavens. The sky stretched above him, and Atlas stood at the far western edge of the world, supporting the enormous weight of the celestial realm. He was not simply holding up a large object. He was maintaining a boundary between heaven and earth. The cosmos depended upon the position of the sky, and Atlas had been given the task of supporting it. He could not put it down. He could not rest. He could not hand the burden to someone else. A single Titan beneath the heavens, the stars above, the earth stretching away into the distance, and Atlas carrying the weight of the sky through the passing ages. Unlike Sisyphus, Atlas did not repeatedly lose his burden. Unlike the Danaids, he did not repeatedly begin again. His punishment was more constant. He had to endure. Every moment, every day, every night, the heavens remained above him, and Atlas remained beneath them. He was not necessarily a prisoner inside Tartarus. His punishment belonged to the wider cosmic landscape. That distinction matters because Greek mythology did not always place every punishment in exactly the same location. Tartarus was the deepest prison, but Atlas could be imagined at the western boundary of the world, carrying the heavens apart from the earth. His existence therefore connected the underworld with the structure of the cosmos itself. The ancient Greeks looked at the sky and saw something enormous. The stars moved across it. The sun traveled from east to west. The moon changed shape. Constellations appeared and disappeared with the seasons. The heavens seemed vast beyond measurement. To imagine a Titan holding that entire expanse was to give physical form to the immensity of the sky. Atlas became the personification of endurance. He did not defeat the gods. He did not escape his punishment. He simply continued, and eventually another hero would meet him, Heracles. During one of his labors, Heracles needed to obtain the golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides, but the location was difficult to discover. Heracles eventually found Atlas. The Titan knew where the garden was. He also knew that approaching it could be dangerous. So Heracles made a bargain. Atlas would retrieve the apples himself. While he was gone, Heracles would temporarily hold the heavens in his place. It was an extraordinary exchange. For a short time, the burden passed from Titan to hero. Heracles lifted the sky. Atlas traveled to the garden. He returned carrying the golden apples. But then Atlas realized something. He could deliver the apples without immediately returning to his burden. Perhaps he could make Heracles continue holding the heavens. Perhaps, after so many ages of suffering, he could finally escape. He told Heracles that he would take the apples to Eurystheus himself. Heracles understood the danger, but instead of arguing, he asked Atlas to take the heavens back for just a moment while Heracles adjusted his position. Atlas agreed. He took the weight again, and Heracles picked up the apples and walked away. The hero had tricked the Titan. Atlas was once again beneath the heavens. His brief opportunity for freedom had disappeared. The story is playful in a way that many tales of the underworld are not. Heracles was clever, Atlas was desperate, and the ancient myth allowed the hero to escape without defeating the Titan by force. Yet the encounter also emphasizes how permanent Atlas' punishment was. Even a brief possibility of freedom could not change his fate. The heavens would always need to be held, and Atlas would always be there to hold them. His story therefore became another image of endurance. Some burdens cannot be thrown away. Some responsibilities cannot be abandoned. Some punishments simply continue. But there is something peaceful in imagining Atlas at the edge of the ancient world. The stars pass overhead. The seasons change. The sun disappears beyond the horizon and returns again. Generations of mortals are born and die. The Olympian gods continue their stories. The kingdoms of men rise and fall. Yet Atlas remains, his shoulders beneath the heavens, his eyes facing the distant horizon, holding the sky exactly where it has always been. And far below, the kingdom of Hades continues its own quiet existence. The ordinary dead wander among the pale flowers. Charon crosses the rivers. Cerberus watches the gates. The judges continue their solemn work. The blessed rest in distant fields. And beneath them all, Tartarus remains. The underworld is not one single place. It is an entire world. A world of rivers and meadows, palaces and prisons, memory and forgetfulness. And now that we have descended through its darkest regions, our journey can begin to turn upward. For there were still living heroes who dared to enter Hades. Among all the stories connected with the underworld, few are as gentle as the story of Orpheus. He was not a warrior. He did not carry a great weapon. He did not seek treasure or power. His gift was music. Orpheus was said to be the greatest musician among mortals. When he played his lyre, the world seemed to pause. Trees bent toward the sound. Wild animals became calm. Birds gathered nearby. Even stones were said to be moved by his music. His songs could reach places that ordinary voices could not. And then Orpheus lost the person he loved. Her name was Eurydice. The ancient stories differ in their details, but the essential story remains the same. Orpheus and Eurydice were married. Their happiness, however, did not last. One day, Eurydice was walking through a meadow with other women. A snake lay hidden among the grass. She stepped upon it. The snake struck. Eurydice was bitten, and the poison took her life. She died suddenly. Orpheus was devastated. The music that had once brought beauty to the world now became music of mourning. He could not accept that Eurydice was gone. So he made a decision that no ordinary mortal could have made. He would go after her. He would descend into the underworld. The journey must have seemed impossible. Every tradition surrounding the dead warned against attempting such a thing. The boundary between life and death was meant to be permanent. But Orpheus continued. He traveled downward, leaving the sunlight behind. Eventually, he reached the entrance to Hades. There stood Cerberus. The great hound guarded the kingdom as he always had. But Orpheus did not fight him. He lifted his lyre, and he played. The music drifted through the darkness. Cerberus became quiet. The monstrous guardian listened. The sound continued beyond him, traveling into the kingdom. The rivers seemed to pause. The shades gathered. Even the dead, who had heard countless songs during their former lives, were drawn toward this one. Orpheus continued deeper. He passed through the shadowed regions of Hades. He crossed the places where ordinary souls wandered. He moved beyond the familiar paths. Eventually, his music reached the rulers of the underworld. Hades heard it. Persephone heard it. The king and queen of the dead listened to a living man sing about his grief. Orpheus did not demand that Eurydice be returned. He did not threaten the gods. He did not claim that the laws of death were unfair. Instead, he sang. He told the story of their love. He described the happiness they had shared. He described the emptiness that remained without her. And he asked for only one thing: let Eurydice return with him. The music affected the underworld in a way that strength never could. Hades, usually portrayed as stern and immovable, was moved. Persephone understood the sorrow of losing someone she loved. She had herself been taken from the world above and forced to become part of the realm below. Perhaps this was why the request carried such weight. The rulers of the dead agreed. Eurydice could return, but there would be one condition. Orpheus had to lead her out of the underworld. He could walk ahead. She would follow behind him. And until they had both reached the world of the living, he could not look back. Not once. He could not turn to make sure she was there. He could not reach for her hand. He could not ask whether she was following. He simply had to trust. It was a simple condition, and yet it was almost impossibly difficult. Orpheus began the journey upward. The darkness stretched around him. His footsteps echoed along the path. Behind him came another set of footsteps. Eurydice. At first, perhaps, he could hear her clearly. Then the sound became faint. The path was long. The light of the living world was still far away. Orpheus continued. He knew that if he looked back too soon, everything would be lost. So he kept walking. One step, then another. The road climbed. The darkness began to thin. Far ahead, a faint glow appeared. The world above was close. He could almost feel the air of the living world, almost hear the wind, almost see the sky. But uncertainty began to grow inside him. Was Eurydice really there? Had the gods kept their promise? Was the sound behind him truly her footsteps? Or had he imagined it? He wanted certainty. He wanted to know that she had followed him this far. The entrance was almost within reach. Orpheus could no longer resist. Turned. For one brief moment he saw Eurydice. She was there, but she was still on the other side of the boundary. The moment their eyes met, the promise was broken. Eurydice began to fade. Orpheus reached toward her, but he could not hold her. She was drawn backward into the darkness. He had come so close, and now she was gone again. This time, there would be no second journey. The gates of Hades closed between them. Orpheus remained on the threshold of the living world. He had entered the kingdom of death. He had moved its rulers with music. He had been granted an exception to the ancient laws. But at the final moment, doubt had overcome trust. And the underworld kept Eurydice. Orpheus returned to the world above alone. His story became a reminder that even the deepest love could not always overcome the boundary between life and death. Yet for a moment, the impossible had almost happened. The kingdom of Hades had listened. And perhaps that was the strangest thing of all. Even in a place where nothing could return, music had reached the hearts of the dead. Orpheus had entered the underworld carrying only his music and his grief. Another hero would enter carrying something very different. Strength. His name was Heracles. Among the heroes of Greek mythology, Heracles was known for extraordinary endurance. But one of his greatest challenges would take him somewhere that no living person was meant to visit: the kingdom of Hades. Heracles had been ordered to complete a series of labors, each intended to test the limits of his strength and courage. Eventually, one final task remained. He was to capture Cerberus, the three-headed hound that guarded the entrance to the underworld. The task was almost impossible by design. Cerberus was not an ordinary animal. He was a child of the monstrous Echidna and Typhon, belonging to an ancient family of creatures that included some of the most terrifying beings in Greek mythology. His three heads watched in different directions. His serpent tail moved behind him. Snakes were said to grow around his body. And his purpose was simple: keep the dead inside, keep the living outside. Heracles would have to cross that boundary. Before beginning the journey, he sought instruction. Some traditions say he was initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries, allowing him to approach the world of the dead with greater understanding. Then he traveled downward. The familiar world disappeared behind him. The underworld opened before him. There he encountered many of the figures whose stories had become part of the landscape of the dead. He saw the shades. He saw the rivers. He saw the distant regions where the souls of mortals remained. And as he traveled, he encountered two ancient heroes in trouble. Theseus and Pirithous had once made a reckless promise. They had decided that each would help the other obtain a daughter of Zeus as a wife. After Theseus had helped Pirithous in an earlier adventure, the two descended into the underworld together. Their purpose was to seize Persephone. They believed they could simply enter the kingdom of Hades and take the queen of the dead. They were wrong. Hades welcomed them and offered them seats. But the seats were enchanted. Once they sat down, they could not rise. The heroes were trapped. Years passed. Then Heracles arrived. He saw Theseus bound there. In some traditions, Heracles freed Theseus by force. He tried to free Pirithous as well. But the earth itself seemed to hold Pirithous. The attempt failed. Pirithous remained below. Theseus was allowed to return to the living world. The episode served as another reminder of the power of Hades. Even great heroes could become helpless within his kingdom. Heracles continued toward the palace. There, he encountered Hades himself. The god of the dead did not simply surrender Cerberus. He set a condition. If Heracles could capture the hound without using weapons, he could take him to the world above. Heracles accepted. He approached Cerberus. The creature snarled. Three mouths opened. The serpent tail moved behind him. But Heracles did not retreat. He seized the hound. Cerberus fought. The three heads struggled against him. The snakes twisted around the hero. Yet Heracles held on. His strength was enough. Eventually, the guardian of the underworld was subdued. Heracles led Cerberus upward. For the first time, the creature who had spent his existence guarding the dead entered the world of sunlight. The bright air must have seemed entirely different from the darkness below. Cerberus had crossed the boundary he was meant to protect, but only temporarily. Once Heracles had completed his task, the hound was returned to Hades. The order of the underworld was restored. The dead remained below. The living returned above. And the guardian returned to the gates. Heracles' journey was different from that of Orpheus. Orpheus had entered the underworld because he wanted to bring someone back. Heracles entered because he had been given a task. He did not need to persuade Hades. He did not attempt to change the laws of death. He simply entered, completed what he had been asked to do, and left. Yet his journey revealed something important. The underworld was not completely inaccessible to the living. The boundary could sometimes be crossed, but doing so required extraordinary circumstances. Heroes could enter. They could encounter the dead. They could even return, but they were never ordinary visitors. The stories preserved the boundary while allowing a few legendary exceptions. And perhaps this made the underworld more mysterious. It was close enough to be imagined, far enough to remain unknown. The living could tell stories about its rivers, its gates, its fields, and its rulers. But no ordinary person could simply walk inside and return with proof. Heracles had returned with Cerberus. Orpheus had returned with his grief. Theseus had returned after years below. Their stories became windows into a place no living audience could see. But there was another kind of visitor to Hades. Not a hero seeking a task. Not a musician seeking a lost wife. Not a mortal trying to escape. Sometimes the dead themselves could appear to the living. And in one of the greatest Greek epics, a hero would descend into the underworld not to rescue anyone, but to seek knowledge. He was Odysseus. His journey to the underworld was very different from those who had come before him. He was not there to capture a monster. He was not trying to retrieve a loved one. He came because he needed an answer. Odysseus had spent years trying to return home to Ithaca after the Trojan War. The journey had become longer and more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. Eventually, the goddess Circe told him that he could not continue without first seeking the advice of a dead prophet. The prophet was Tiresias. But Tiresias was in the underworld, so Odysseus had to go there. Circe instructed him how to reach the boundary of the dead. He traveled to a distant land where the world seemed to grow dim. There, he performed the necessary rites. A trench was dug. Offerings were made. Sacrifices were prepared. Blood was poured into the earth. And then the dead began to gather. They came from the darkness. At first, they were only shades, figures without the solid presence of the living. But they remembered. They recognized the world they had left. They wanted to drink the blood that Odysseus had offered. According to the ancient story, the blood temporarily gave the shades greater awareness. It allowed them to speak clearly. But Odysseus had been warned. He could not allow every soul to drink. He had come for Tiresias. So he guarded the offering and waited. Then the prophet appeared. Tiresias had been dead for some time, yet his wisdom remained. He drank and spoke. He warned Odysseus about the journey ahead. The hero would face more dangers. The sea would continue to challenge him. His companions would make a terrible mistake. And even after reaching Ithaca, his troubles would not immediately end. But Tiresias also gave him hope. Odysseus would eventually return home. The meeting revealed something important about the Greek conception of the dead. Death did not necessarily erase everything that had made someone who they were. The dead could remember. They could speak. They could recognize the living. But their existence had changed. They were shadows of their former selves. They needed blood to become fully aware. Without it, their voices and memories seemed distant. The underworld was therefore not a place where personality completely disappeared. It was a place where personality became faint. Odysseus soon encountered another familiar soul. His mother, Anticlea. He had not known that she had died. The sight of her was devastating. He tried to embrace her, but his hands passed through her. 3 times he reached for her. 3 times there was nothing solid to hold. Anticlea explained that this was the nature of the dead. Once life had departed, The body remained behind while the spirit moved into Hades. Odysseus could speak with her. He could hear her voice, but he could not bring her back. The encounter was quiet and deeply human. Odysseus had traveled across seas and survived monsters. He had faced storms and supernatural dangers. Yet nothing could prepare him for the simple realization that his mother was gone. He asked about his family. She told him about his wife, Penelope, about his son, Telemachus, about the household he had left behind. She gave him news from the world above. Then she disappeared back into the darkness. Odysseus continued among the dead. He saw famous women from earlier generations. He saw heroes who had fought at Troy. And eventually, he encountered the spirit of Achilles. Achilles had been the greatest warrior of the Trojan War. His life had been glorious. His death had made him immortal in another sense. His name would never be forgotten. Yet in the underworld, Achilles did not speak like someone who had received a magnificent reward. When Odysseus praised him for his greatness, Achilles expressed a very different feeling. He would rather be alive and serve as a poor man's laborer than rule over all the dead. The statement was striking. The hero who had chosen a short life with everlasting glory would have preferred an ordinary life if he could have it again. For the Greeks, this was a profound reminder of the value of life itself. The living world might contain hardship, but it also contained sunlight, movement. The dead had none of these things in the same way. Odysseus continued his journey. He encountered Ajax, who still held anger toward him because of their conflict over Achilles' armor. Odysseus tried to speak, but Ajax would not answer. Even death had not erased his resentment. Then Odysseus saw other figures whose lives had become legendary. He saw Minos, the great judge. He saw Orion. He saw Tityus, whose punishment continued in the darkness. The underworld became a meeting place between different generations. Mothers, warriors, prophets, criminals, people who had been famous, people who had been forgotten. They all existed beneath the same boundary. Eventually, Odysseus feared that the dead might overwhelm him. He returned toward the ship. The living world was waiting. He had entered Hades seeking knowledge, but he left carrying something more difficult: understanding. The dead could speak. They could remember. They could warn. But they could not simply return to life. The boundary remained. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of his journey. The Greeks could imagine the dead as close enough to speak with, yet far enough away that no living person could completely reach them. Hades was not merely a destination. It was a separation, a quiet distance between two states of existence. Odysseus returned to the world above. The voices faded behind him, but the underworld remained. Beyond the rivers and distant fields of the underworld stood a place unlike any mortal palace. It was the house of Hades. This was the home of Hades and Persephone. It was not a cheerful palace. Neither was it necessarily a place of torment. It was something quieter, ancient, still, a dwelling at the heart of a kingdom where the living could not remain. Hades himself was rarely portrayed as a god who spent his time tormenting the dead. His responsibility was different. He was the keeper of the boundaries. The dead belonged to him. The living belonged to the world above. His kingdom existed to keep those two worlds apart. The house of Hades therefore represented order. Once a soul had crossed into the underworld, it was expected to remain there. Its exact appearance was never described consistently. Instead, poets gave us fragments. A dark palace, his thresholds, a throne, a king, a queen, and countless souls moving through the kingdom beyond. The house was sometimes imagined as richly appointed, befitting a divine ruler. But its beauty was different from the golden brightness associated with Olympus. Olympus belonged to the sky. Its gods were associated with sunlight, storms, music, feasting, and the open air. The house of Hades belonged to what was hidden. Its atmosphere was solemn. The halls were quiet. The light was dim. Nothing needed to grow there. Nothing needed to age. Nothing needed to be harvested. The dead had already passed beyond those concerns. At the center of this realm sat Hades. His name was sometimes treated with caution by the Greeks. Even saying the name of the god associated with death could feel uncomfortable. He was also known by another name, Pluton, connected with wealth. This might seem strange at first. Why would the god of the dead be associated with riches? Because everything that grows from the earth eventually returns to it. The underworld, therefore, contained both death and the mysterious wealth of the ground. Hades ruled what was beneath, and beside him sat Persephone. Her presence transformed the character of the kingdom. She had once belonged entirely to the world above. She was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, and her life was closely connected with the fields, flowers, and growing things of the earth. In spring, she walked among blossoms. In summer, she moved through fields heavy with grain. The world around her seemed full of color and abundance. But one day, while gathering flowers with companions, Persephone noticed something beautiful growing apart from the others. She reached toward it, and the earth opened. From the darkness beneath came Hades. The god of the dead carried Persephone away into his kingdom. The opening in the earth closed behind them. Above, the meadow became quiet. At first, Demeter did not know where her daughter had gone. She searched. She traveled across the earth carrying torches through the darkness of night. She questioned gods and mortals. She wandered through fields and villages. But Persephone was nowhere to be found. Demeter's grief began to affect the entire world. She was the goddess of agriculture. When she withdrew her blessing, the earth became barren. Seeds stopped growing. Fields dried. The grain no longer rose from the soil. Trees became bare. Mortals began to suffer. The gods noticed. The world could not continue without the goddess of the harvest. Eventually, Demeter learned what had happened. Persephone was below. She had been taken into the kingdom of Hades. Demeter demanded that her daughter be returned. The situation became a problem for Olympus itself. Zeus could not ignore the suffering of humanity. But Hades did not wish to give Persephone up entirely. A compromise was needed. The decision eventually came down to one detail. Had Persephone eaten anything while she was in the underworld? The answer was yes. She had eaten several seeds of a pomegranate. The pomegranate was small. By eating the fruit of the realm below, Persephone had become connected to it. She could not simply return to the world above forever. The gods therefore reached an agreement. Persephone would spend part of the year with Demeter. The rest of the year would be spent with Hades. And so the cycle of the seasons began. When Persephone returned to the world above, Demeter rejoiced. The earth awakened. Flowers appeared. Trees grew leaves. Fields became green. Farmers planted their crops. The warmth of the growing season returned. But eventually, Persephone would have to descend again. As she approached the underworld, Demeter's happiness faded. The earth became quieter. The leaves changed. The fields emptied. The cold arrived. Winter settled over the world. Her journey connected the world above with the world below. she was not entirely of either realm. She belonged to both. This made her different from Hades. He had always been a god of the underworld. Persephone had known the sunlight. She understood the world of the living. She also understood the kingdom of the dead. Because of this, she became an especially important figure within the underworld. She could move between worlds. She had experienced both. Her story also changed the way the Greeks imagined death. The underworld was no longer entirely separate from the rhythms of nature. Life appeared to come from death and darkness. Persephone's story reflected that cycle. She descended. She disappeared. Then she returned. Her absence brought winter. Her return brought spring. The story did not necessarily mean that the Greeks believed every plant literally died and returned with Persephone. Instead, mythology gave familiar natural changes a human shape. Winter became a time of separation. Spring became a reunion. The fields reflected the emotions of the gods. There was sorrow in the cold months. There was hope in the returning light. And beneath the earth, Persephone's role continued to grow. She was no longer simply the daughter who had been taken away. She became queen. She sat beside Hades. She listened to the stories of those who entered their kingdom. The transformation was gradual. The girl who had once gathered flowers became a goddess who understood the boundary between life and death. She knew what it meant to lose the sunlight. She knew what it meant to return. Perhaps this was why the Greeks could imagine her as compassionate towards certain souls. She was not entirely distant from the living. She had been one of them. She had known the warmth of the earth. She had walked beneath the open sky. She had loved her mother. And every year she returned. The pomegranate seeds therefore became a symbol of the bond between the two worlds. Persephone could never remain completely in one. Part of her belonged to the surface. Part belonged to the depths. Her divided existence made the changing year feel almost like a conversation between worlds. The earth above waited for her. The underworld waited too. And each year, the journey repeated. She descended. Winter came. She returned. Spring followed. The cycle continued without end. For the Greeks, this gave the changing seasons a sense of meaning. Winter was not simply emptiness. It was waiting. Beneath the frozen ground, seeds remained. Beneath the world of the living, Persephone remained. Nothing seemed to happen, and yet something was preparing to return. Then, slowly, the days lengthened. The earth softened. The first flowers appeared. Persephone was coming home. And with her return, the world above began to breathe again. The underworld had lost its queen for another season. But Hades knew she would return, because some journeys in Greek mythology were not endings. They were cycles. And Persephone's was the greatest cycle of all. But as Queen of the Dead, she was also given more solemn names and titles. She was no longer only the young goddess wandering through fields. She had become a powerful divine presence. In the house of Hades, she sat beside her husband and received the souls who entered their kingdom. Her authority could be seen in several of the myths surrounding the underworld. When Orpheus descended in search of Eurydice, he did not appeal only to Hades. He sang before both rulers. His music reached Persephone. She understood what it meant to lose someone. Her own story had begun with separation. She had been taken away from her mother. She knew the pain of being divided from the world she loved. Perhaps that was why the sorrow in Orpheus' song could reach her. She and Hades allowed Eurydice the chance to return. The decision was extraordinary. The laws of the dead were rarely altered. But Persephone had heard the music, and she listened. Her compassion did not mean that she could undo death whenever she wished. The boundary remained. Eurydice could return only under a condition. When Orpheus looked back, the opportunity disappeared. Even the Queen of the Dead could not simply erase the ancient separation between life and death. But the story revealed that Persephone possessed something beyond authority. She possessed understanding. Other myths connected her with the fate of souls who entered the underworld. She could be stern. She could be distant. She could also show mercy. Like the changing seasons, her character contained contrasts. She was associated with flowers and darkness, with youth and age, with life returning from the earth and bodies returning to the earth. This duality made her one of the most fascinating figures in Greek mythology. Her connection to agriculture was never completely lost. She remained tied to the cycle of seeds. A seed disappeared beneath the soil. For a time, it seemed dead. Then it broke open. A small shoot appeared. It rose toward the light. Eventually, it became a plant, flower, or stalk of grain. The Greeks saw something profound in this process. The earth received what appeared to be lifeless, and from it, new life emerged. Persephone's descent mirrored the same movement. She disappeared below. Then she returned. Her story therefore existed between death and renewal. This did not mean that the Greeks believed death itself was simply the same thing as spring. The underworld remained a realm of the dead, but Persephone provided a connection between the two. She made the boundary less absolute. The queen could leave her kingdom. She could return to her mother, and then she could descend again. The cycle gave her an unusual kind of power. She was familiar with what lies beyond the threshold. She had crossed it herself. For the dead who arrived in Hades, she was therefore more than a distant goddess. She was someone who understood transition. She knew what it meant to leave one world behind. She knew what it meant to enter another. And she knew that returning was possible, at least for her. Her marriage to Hades was also more complicated than the simple image of a god stealing a young goddess and keeping her forever. Different ancient traditions told the story in different ways. In some, the abduction was emphasized. In others, Persephone gradually became a powerful queen in her own right. The mythology changed as poets, worshippers, and storytellers retold it. What remained constant was her position. Persephone belonged to the underworld. She was its queen. The house of Hades was no longer simply the domain of a solitary god. It had a ruler beside him, and their partnership reflected the two sides of death. Hades represented permanence. Persephone represented transition. He remained below. She moved between worlds. Together, they presided over the dead. There was also something deeply seasonal about her relationship with Hades. When she descended, the earth above became quiet. When she returned, the earth awakened. The two worlds were therefore connected by her movements. The living world waited for her. The underworld waited for her too. Neither could completely possess her. She was always returning somewhere. This made Persephone's crown unlike the crowns of mortal queens. A mortal queen ruled one kingdom. Persephone belonged to two. Her kingdom above was filled with flowers, grain, sunlight, and her mother's love. Her kingdom below contained shadows, rivers, gates, and the countless souls of the dead. She carried something from each world into the other, and perhaps that is why her story remained so important. It offered an image of change that did not require one world to destroy the other. The living world continued. The dead remained. Between them, Persephone traveled. Eventually, every mortal would make the journey downward. But Persephone knew the path in both directions. She understood the road that led into darkness, and she knew the road that led back toward the light. So when winter arrived, the ancient Greeks could imagine that Persephone had not simply disappeared. She had returned to her throne. The fields above were waiting. The dead below were waiting. And in the house of Hades, the queen took her place once more beside her husband. The gates closed. The rivers continued flowing. The shades continued their quiet wandering. And Persephone, queen of the dead, began another season in the kingdom beneath the earth. And so, after following the paths, rivers, and stories of the Greek underworld, we arrive once more at its quietest boundary. The journey has taken us far from the world of sunlight. We have crossed the rivers that separated the living from the dead. We have passed the gates watched by Cerberus. We have wandered through the fields where ordinary souls remained as shadows of the lives they once knew. We have entered the house of Hades, where the god of the dead and Persephone, his queen, watched over their ancient kingdom. We have seen that the underworld was not simply a place of darkness. It contained many worlds within itself. There were places of punishment, where the consequences of a person's actions continued forever. Sisyphus pushed his stone. Tantalus reached toward what he could never have. Ixion remained bound to his turning wheel. The Danaids carried water that could never fill their vessel. Atlas stood beneath the heavens, carrying a burden that could never be set down. Their stories were frightening, but they were also reminders. The Greeks understood that choices mattered. Some actions could not be undone. Some consequences could follow a person beyond the end of life. Yet the underworld was not made entirely of punishment. There were quieter places. Fields where the ordinary dead wandered. Blessed regions where certain souls could find peace. Rivers where memory could disappear. Waters where remembrance could be preserved. The dead were not all treated alike. Their stories continued in different forms. Some wandered. Some rested. Some were judged. Some were remembered. And some became part of the mysteries surrounding life itself. We followed Orpheus into the darkness as he searched for Eurydice. His music crossed boundaries that strength could not. For a brief moment, death seemed willing to release what it had taken. But the ancient rule remained. The living and the dead could not easily belong to the same world. We followed Heracles into Hades as he captured Cerberus and returned with the impossible proof of his journey. We followed Odysseus among the shades as he listened to the voices of the dead. His mother spoke to him. Achilles reminded him of the value of life. The dead could remember. They could speak. But they could not become fully alive again. That distinction remained at the heart of the Greek imagination. Death was not simply another place. It was a boundary, and the underworld existed to preserve it. Perhaps that is why Hades was not imagined as a villain in the way later stories sometimes portrayed him. He was not the embodiment of evil. He was the keeper of what had already happened. The dead belonged below. The living belonged above. His kingdom maintained the order of the cosmos. And beside him stood Persephone. She was perhaps the perfect companion for such a kingdom because she understood both sides. She knew the warmth of the earth. She knew the silence beneath it. Every year she descended. Every year she returned. Her journey gave the changing seasons a rhythm. Winter became a time of absence. Spring became a time of return. The earth itself seemed to remember her. And through her, the Greeks could imagine that disappearance did not always mean complete erasure. A seed disappears beneath the soil. For a while, nothing can be seen. Then something begins to grow. A flower opens. A field becomes green. the world changes. Persephone's story carried a similar rhythm: downward, then upward, darkness, then light, separation, then reunion. But the Greek underworld was never meant to provide a single answer to what happens after death. No living person could completely know what waited beyond the final threshold. So the Greeks created stories. They imagined rivers for memory and forgetfulness. They imagined judges who could see beyond mortal appearances. They imagined heroes who could briefly cross the boundary. They imagined gods who ruled beneath the earth. And they filled the darkness with stories so that the unknown would not remain entirely unknown. Tonight, we have traveled through those stories. We have walked beside rivers. We have listened to the voices of shades. We have stood before the house of Hades. And now, slowly, we can imagine turning away. The distant gates remain behind us. The waters continue to flow. The palace remains silent. Cerberus keeps his ancient watch. The dead continue their quiet existence. Nothing in that kingdom needs to hurry. Time moves differently there. Above us, the world of the living continues. The wind moves through the trees. Night settles over the earth. The stars appear overhead. Somewhere, a river moves through the darkness. Somewhere, flowers wait beneath the soil for another spring. And for now, we remain on the living side of the boundary. The underworld can remain where the ancient Greeks placed it. Beneath the earth, beyond the rivers, behind the gates, a place of shadows, memory, mystery, and eternal stories. Perhaps the most comforting part of these myths is that the underworld was never completely empty of beauty. Even in darkness, there was music. Even in winter, there was the promise of spring. Even among the dead, memories remained. And even at the edge of the unknown, the Greeks continued to tell stories. So as the night grows quieter, we can leave the kingdom of Hades behind. The rivers fade into the distance. The house disappears into the darkness. Persephone takes her place beside Hades, and the ancient world grows still. Above the earth, the stars continue shining. The living world breathes softly. And for tonight, our journey is over. Good night.